Shaggy wasn't even halfway across the bar when it started to transform around him. Frank and his builders blurred like they were in fast forward and rushed everywhere around the bar at once. The NPCs all around ignored everything as they were lifted by the system, and the dirt floor of the bar was replaced with wood slats. Metal walls formed all around as pieces of wood and robots soared around. NPCs were moved as needed while the system implemented whatever changes Vlad was inputting. Shaggy even saw the Omega Obadiah was studying copy itself and then form into a nearby wall. Apparently, if the NPC was interacting with a resource, the system would duplicate it. Shaggy briefly wondered if that could be exploited. But he shook off the notion. They really didn't have time to explore that. He walked across the ever-changing bar, trying not get in the system's way. He didn't think anything would go wrong, but he also didn't want to risk it. He cleared the entrance to the bar just as a large bronze metal door was swooping in to place itself in the doorway. Shaggy glanced around as he tried not to look at the bar. He wanted to see what it looked like when it was completed. Although he had warned Vlad, he was sure they were in for some Gothic-style architecture. He found Ren leading a few lackeys into the reshaping bar, a pensive look on his face. Nearby Slink, Ephemera and Blobby were dragging a few bits of metal and Omegas into the bar. Standing at the center of the square in front of their bar was Vance. The old werewolf stood with his arms crossed over his chest, slowly spinning, watching and listening to the surrounding mayhem. Although the Omegas had stopped dropping, a few were still wandering around. Not to mention the cat and rabbit bots. As Shaggy walked over to his werewolf mentor, he wondered if the soups had different names for the smaller robots. It made sense that every group would call them something different. The game had a tagging feature that would allow players to see the names of various things. But like most in-game stuff, Shaggy had it turned off. It completely ruined his immersion, and it didn't even help with identifying other players. You had to know their names before you could see their tag. So what was the point? "You smell all that?" Vance asked as Shaggy stopped next to him. Shaggy took a big sniff of the air. He had turned off the scent trails after his fight with Tilani. There were just too many people in the enclosed space of the bar. The colors were getting to be too much. But he could still almost taste the distinct scents in the air. Dirt, sweat, and blood were the most prevalent. But oil, metal, and smoke were also growing in strength. Shaggy was sure a lot of Undertown was on fire, or there were more fire-based powers being thrown around. But there was also something else, beneath the more mundane scents, something that tugged at Shaggy's inner wolf. Lot of noise in the air. Blood and robots make sense. Even the dirt. But there's something else. Shaggy said as he scratched his head and took another big whiff of the air. Vance nodded. Noise is a good way to think about it. Part of the trick is to distinguish the different sounds. But it's what you smell underneath. That's what I was talking about. Vance adjusted the sleeve on his leather jacket as he spun. Still watching the slowly descending Bladelings. It's a smell you'll get acquainted with quickly. It's fear. Shaggy rubbed his nose to try to clear the scents before he sniffed again. How does that work? It doesn't smell like anything, really. Shouldn't it smell like sweat and piss or something? Ha 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 ha. Yeah, you'd think so. But no, fear is more nebulous than that. It's one of the first non-standard scents we wers can pick up on. If you focus, you can kinda section out the different smells within the scent, but that takes time and is ultimately meaningless. It's the fear that is important. Scared prey can get really stupid, and scared prey with limited ethics in a confined space can get even more stupid. Still think we should get out of here? Of course I do. This place is a powder keg and these robots are the match. Vance growled. Shaggy shrugged. Undertown's handled itself well so far. Sure, but how long before one of the bigger gangs down here tries something stupid because of all this? The gangster had even said he had his boys making waves all over the place. Shaggy wondered how true that was. But he shook it off. They were shoring up their defenses, And the Bladelings were far easier to deal with compared to their larger brothers. They could handle it. Sure, Shaggy admitted. But we got it. We're going to hole ourselves up and wait it all out. My crew got this. Vance grunted and turned to look at the still reshaping bar. The AI governing the NPC must have calculated its response based on Vlad's final plans. Because Vance looked impressed, even though the thing was still building itself with the help of Frank and the others. But Vance still shook his head. It's impressive, but your pack is going to have to fight tooth and claw when the next wave comes down. They're a gang, not a pack, Vance. Shaggy chuckled as he watched the first of the Bladelings reach the edge of Undertown's east side. Shaggy's head bent forward as Vance slapped the back of his head. The blow had come on fast and hard. Shaggy was sure his digital brain was rattling around in its skull as he turned indignantly to Vance. Damn it, Cub. I told you to make a pack. What the hell have you been doing? Shaggy rubbed the back of his head as he glared up at the taller werewolf. Sure, you told me. But you didn't exactly explain the particulars. What? Am I supposed to wander around and ask if people want to be in my pack? Vance struck the back of Shaggy's head again. The old wolf was way too fast for Shaggy as he felt the blow connect. Yes. You damn idiot. A pack bond is a fairly simple thing, but it can prove incredibly useful. However, both individuals have to agree to it and all the members have to agree on a leader. Shaggy was sure there was a dent in his head as he screamed back at Vance. Well, how was I supposed to know that? My so-called mentor bailed on me before he explained things fully. Vance raised his hand again, but Shaggy jumped back. The older werewolf didn't chase after him and scoffed as he simply batted the air angrily. Vance adjusted his leather jacket again before he turned back to the bar. Grumbling, he shook his head and waved Shaggy toward the bar. Well, get in there and start making a pack. You're young still, so you can't have many members. But the bond will help with what's coming your way. Shaggy nodded before his brain parsed Vance's words. You're not sticking around? Vance shook his head. Nope. You're not my only charge down here. As much as you would like me to hold your hand, that's not how I do things. I just stopped by 'cause your scent was the strongest here. Something you might want to fix if you piss off any other wers, by the way. Well, fine. Shaggy grumbled as he turned back to the bar. The fact that there were other wers down here was interesting, especially other wolves. If Vance was to be believed. Vance started walking northward, but stopped as something occurred to him. Oh yeah, watch out for that old cyborg. He smells like government. Obadiah? Shaggy asked, confused. Vance raised an eyebrow, but nodded. That's the one. Work with him if you want, but keep your nose up and make a damn pack. With that, Vance transformed into his werewolf shape and ran off. Shaggy watched the enormous wolf cross the square and disappear down one of the north streets. Several lackeys nearby stopped and stared as the werewolf ran out of the square. Some even turned worried eyes to Shaggy, but he just waved them off. They still needed as much metal as they could get into the bar. Shaggy turned and took in the still reforming building. The first floor was done and the speeding builders and floating materials were now working on the second story. He studied the first floor, and he wasn't disappointed. The entire structure was a mix of wood and metal, with large sections of the building being made of the Omega's bronze metal. Shaggy thought about the corpses encased within and shuddered slightly as he stared at the brown walls. But he shook it off. What better material for a lair of evil than corpses? Of course, only he and the other leaders knew that bit. As he moved closer, he saw the walls were actually quite thick and there were plenty of window spaces. Except they apparently didn't have any glass, so the windows were left empty. Shaggy wondered why Vlad hadn't used the system to buy any glass as the front of the bar's second story spun and whirled rapidly before it settled. Shaggy smiled as he stared up at the slowly coalescing sign. The Viper's Den was emblazoned on a large bronze sign just above the door. The dark brown color didn't really stick out much, but Shaggy couldn't help but grin at what they had built in such a short time. Sure, it was with the system's help. But hey, they paid for it with perfectly good ill-gotten gains. His grin turned into a full-on smile as the thudding of robotic feet resounded through the air. "What are you smiling at?" a woman's voice asked as he passed through the large bronze door of the bar. Shaggy glanced over and saw Chromia leaning against a brand new table. She still had a sullen look on her face, but Shaggy's gaze was on the wooden table. Apparently, Vlad had bought or built them some amenities. He glanced back up at Chromia's dark eyes and widened his smile. "Nothing much, just excited about what's coming. We got a lot of bots headed this way." Chromia snorted. "That excites you, does it?" "I'm always up for a good fight." Shaggy shrugged, moving into the bar proper and looking for some lackeys. He wanted to try out this pack thing as soon as possible, and lackeys would fit the bill nicely. Chromia fell in step with him as she asked, "Speaking of that, what happened with Tilani?" Shaggy shrugged again. "No idea. The dude melted into a pile of goo, and I buried him." "You buried him?" Shaggy waggled a palm up and down. "Kind of. So you forced him into using enough of his power that he lost cohesion, but you didn't finish the job?" Chromia asked indignantly. "What was I supposed to do? He turned into a pile of lava? I didn't exactly have my water gun with me. So I threw some dirt on him and it crusted over. I figure that will slow him down somewhat." "Won't it?" Shaggy asked, turning pensive. The fight with Tilani had been a weird one. But Shaggy wasn't sure he wanted to redo it. Not without the proper weapons in place. "Like a fire hose." Chromia looked thoughtful. "I mean, most of the Raku under Tilani know about his powers. Not to mention his limited ability to hold himself together when he gets too angry. But I don't know how long he takes to get his shit back together. But sure, burying him would probably slow down the process. Especially if it was deep." Shaggy coughed and looked everywhere but at the one-eyed, tan-skinned woman. He didn't want to mention the thin layer of dirt he had covered Tilani in. It had been enough to crust over the lava, but Tilani wasn't exactly buried deep. Chromia seemed to pick up on his unspoken admission as she snorted. "Great. So he could be on his way here right now." Shaggy shook his head. "No way. Even with his boys looking, it'll take them a bit to find him. Besides, he has bigger things to think about now. Between Cog's message and the next wave of robots." Chromia nodded but still looked angry. Although that was normal when she was around Shaggy. They made their way around a few more tables and across a new dance floor made of some shiny red material Shaggy didn't want to think about. Lackeys and civilians were now seated at tables and chairs, talking animatedly as a few kept watch near the various windows that surrounded the bottom floor. Vlad had kept the wooden bar along the building's eastern side, but had improved and expanded it slightly with newer wood. Shaggy figured they were going to have to purchase some paint later to make sure the entire building matched. But that was another idea for later. For all he knew, Vlad was buying paint from the terminal right now, anyway. He briefly wondered if they could restock food through the terminal as well. Shaggy spun in place, looking for any familiar lackey. He really wanted his first pack member to be someone he had worked with before. As he came around, he caught eyes with a still frowning Chromia. He thought about asking the surly woman, but he quickly brushed it off. That was just asking for trouble. Finally, he spotted someone he knew. It wasn't exactly his first choice, but he would make do. "Hey, Yuki. I got a question for you. So let me get this straight. I say yes to you, and I get to be a werewolf." Shaggy rubbed the bridge of his nose in aggravation. "No, Yuki. Like I said before, this will just make you a part of my pack." Yuki kept his eyes out the empty western-facing window and snorted. "How can I be a part of your pack and not be a werewolf? Huh, smart guy? Yes or no, Yuki?" Shaggy had been talking to the small lackey for a few minutes now. The sounds of metal and battle were growing louder and louder with each passing second. But the annoying bastard kept standing there idly fiddling with his rusty-looking rifle. Shaggy figured most of the weapons people were using had been from some of the smaller gangs they had wrecked. They weren't in the best shape, but they could do the job. Yuki scratched his head and grunted, non-committally. Shaggy made an annoyed sound and turned around. He needed to find someone to ask to be in his pack, and he really wanted it to be a lackey with a decent loyalty rating. He was looking around as the bar still spun itself into existence. NPCs walked every which way, completely oblivious to the rearranging building they were standing in. He heard Yuki start to splutter something, when noticed Rita and called out. "Rita! Want to be in my pack?" The matronly lackey had found herself a short sword and was happily talking away with a group of similar-clad women. She raised an eyebrow as Shaggy shouted across the bar, as did several other NPCs. But Shaggy really didn't care at this point. He thought he saw the older woman go a bit pink in the cheeks as she shouted back. "Shit, boss. I thought I already was." She giggled a little bit as she excused herself from her friends and walked toward Shaggy. Shaggy thought he heard Yuki shout something indignant, but he was too busy with the new notification that had popped in his face. Shaggy grinned. Apparently Rita's response had been enough. Notification. You have started your own pack. This is a function limited to therianthropes and other individuals capable of creating a magic bond. As a young werewolf, you will be limited to a small pack of 5. Your pack mates will have a sense of where you are at all times. You will also share a small amount of your gift with them. 5% of your stats will be applied to each member of your pack. If you make them a full were, then the stats applied will increase to 10%. All members of your pack will be identified with your mark. Create mark? Pack size, 1 of 5. Shaggy quickly tapped create mark as Rita slowed her walking and her eyes grew wide. He didn't know what was happening to the older woman. But he couldn't wait to find out. First though, he quickly sketched out a wolf head as his mark. Probably not the most original idea, but Shaggy figured it got the message across. He superimposed the wolf's head onto a moon and quickly accepted the mark as his own. When he did, Rita's flushed face grew slightly pained and other NPCs rushed over to help. Shaggy also bolted over and grasped his new pack member's arm. Rita grit her teeth and seemed to suck down the pain as she tried to keep her feet under her. Shaggy grabbed her arm to steady her, and when he did, Rita's pain seemed to stop. Rita glanced at him confused as she panted heavily. She raised the sleeve on her dirty gray blouse and looked at her arm. Imprinted on her left arm like a brand was Shaggy's mark. Several of Rita's friends threw nasty looks at him, and Shaggy almost apologized when Rita held in delight. "You good, Rita?" Rita gave him a feral grin, and Shaggy thought her teeth looked sharper than normal. "Good? Shit, boss. I feel like I could take on the world." Rita nodded as she seemed to take his meaning. "You going to do this to them?" "That's the plan." Rita whooped excitedly again as she took off like a shot through the large bar. People got out of her way as the newly minted pack member searched for some of the others. Her friends took off in pursuit, shooting Shaggy confused looks. Shaggy just shrugged as Yuki called over from his position from the window. "Damn it, that's not fair. You snooze you lose, kid." Shaggy shrugged and turned to look around the bar again. The second floor was just coming together as he spun around. A wooden tiered staircase wound its way up to the second-story balcony overlooking the bar floor. Rooms were coming into being just as a gunshot rang out from the eastern side. Screams and cries of concern went up as Shaggy snapped his head and around and tried to rush over. But he slammed into someone and recoiled harshly. He almost snapped at the person when he realized it was Chromia. Apparently she was still following him around. Shaggy gave her a quizzical look, but the one-eyed woman just snorted at him again and motioned toward the east side of the bar. Several gangsters were crowding around the window next to the bar, but no more shots were going off. Shaggy couldn't see anything through the mass of people and he almost started shoving people out of his way when Ren spoke up from nearby. A timid purple hand rose from one of the people standing next to the eastern window. The lackey's purple cheeks were dark with embarrassment as several lackeys around her chuckled. Her partner covering the other side of the window just shook his head as he kept his eyes peeled out the window. "It's cool, Dave." Just a trigger-happy grunt. "Get in here." Ren shouted out the window over the heads of all the smaller NPCs. Shaggy just made out Dave's voice through the window. "Cool. Be prepared. We got wounded civs incoming." Shaggy raised an eyebrow, but looked around the bar, searching for the Needle Sisters. But with the bar a whirl of eye-bending construction right now, it was hard to find them. They had been on the first floor when Shaggy had gone outside, but now they were nowhere to be seen. A tap on his shoulder brought Shaggy around to face Chromia again. The sharp-faced woman nodded toward the bar's south side and said, "They'll be in the infirmary." Shaggy nodded like he knew where that was and started walking toward the south wall. Just past the center dance floor and the stage for musical performers stood the south wall. About halfway down the wall was a small metal door with a white nameplate that read Infirmary. Shaggy grinned. It was a smart move from the vampire. He wondered at the bonuses they would get for the room as he pushed his in, or tried to. The door was swinging inward when it burst outward, nearly snapping Shaggy's wrist. Leslie came barreling through the door, annoyed look on her face. When she saw Shaggy and Chromia, her face softened a bit, but she still growled angrily. "No more right now, please." Rashi is on her last legs. Her power can only go so far. Shaggy grunted, but nodded understandingly. "I get it, but we got more civilians coming in. Is there anything we can do for them? Without Rashi?" Leslie's face twisted in thought for a few seconds before the front door burst open and thudding feet sounded on the new wood floor. The Electric Needle Sister grunted and started walking around the bar's stage. Shaggy and Chromia followed on her heels. As they moved around the stage and got a decent look at the newcomers, Shaggy felt his face grimace. They did not look good. The denizens of Undertown were made of some tough stuff, but these people looked like they had been on the run for days. Not hours. Shaggy even saw Dave's normally happy face look a little pensive as he tried to help the injured as best he could. Chromia snorted as she watched the affable player help an old man into a chair. "I thought you were villains?" "Yeah," Shaggy said. "Villains. Not assholes. These people don't need us to step on them. Undertown was already doing that. Besides, there are plenty of other people who need robbing." Chromia raised an eyebrow at him as Leslie chuckled and mumbled something under her breath. Shaggy couldn't quite make it out, but he thought he heard her say, "Telling the truth." Leslie rushed out to help the nearest person as Shaggy moved out of the way. There wasn't a lot of space behind the stage and probably even less in the small infirmary they had. The Needle Sisters didn't need him jamming up the works. Gunshots started resounding from all sides as more and more lackeys started to open fire. Shaggy twisted to look at Chromia. The metal woman had transformed into her metal form again and was moving toward the front door. Shaggy moved to join her, keeping an eye out for Rita. Everyone in the bar was running all around, trying to stay out of everyone's way. Dave was herding the civilians to the center while Ren and Tinsel were moving toward the door. Slink was firing 2 pistols out an east-facing window gleefully as Ephemera was more methodically shooting a hunting rifle she had procured from somewhere. Shaggy thought he saw Obadiah still standing next to his broken Omega robot, but the old man had a hand down on the thing's head, doing something. He tried to get a better look, but Rita's voice shouted at him as he made it to the crowded door. "Got them, boss," Rita said gleefully. Vic, Sybil, Seacrass, and Tom all looked at the excited Rita and then at Shaggy. Clearly the woman hadn't explained anything and Shaggy really didn't have the time to explain. He placed a hand on Seacrass and Tom's arms as he asked, "You guys want to be a part of my pack?" He tried to look all 4 of them in their eyes in turn. All of them nodded, but Sybil was halfway through a question when the painful spasms hit them at the same time. Seacrass and Tom seemed to have it easier as Shaggy was in contact with them when he asked the question. But he quickly switched his hold when their pack marks started to appear. Apparently, the change would be more painful until he touched them and gave them the mark. Shaggy wasn't really sure how all this meshed with him being a mutant werewolf in-game. But he was ready to take any advantage he could get. The others seemed to snap out of whatever change the pack agreement did to them at the same time. The four of them were glancing at their arms and hands with looks of wonder. Vic had a rifle in his hands and smiled as he aimed down the sights out the north window. "I'm happy for all of you, but we have some robots to break." Shaggy smiled. His four new pack members all smiled at him, each looking somewhat manic and feral as they turned toward the front door. Shaggy pushed his way to the front and the five of them rushed out the door. Shaggy even saw Sybil and Tom forego the front door entirely and jump out the north-facing windows. He stifled a laugh as several lackey looked them like they were crazy. Shaggy couldn't keep the cackle from escaping his lips as they pushed out the door and into the dirt square in front of the bar. Shaggy was impressed. Cog had really been churning out his robots. Dozens of Bladelings were charging down the streets. Odd triangular-shaped arms held up, ready to thrust them into anyone or anything stupid enough to get close. Luckily, small arms fire seemed to hurt them way more than their Omega brothers. The gunfire coming from not only their bar but also from a few surrounding neighborhoods were dropping the things by the score. There were even a few flyers in the sky now, doing battle with the catbots. With the Omegas no longer falling from the sky, it was probably safer to fly around. Shaggy couldn't help but grin. An oncoming horde of robots. Superior firepower from a defensive position. Air superiority. This was going to be a cakewalk. At least he thought so. Then one of the flying NPCs in the air opened fire with twin energy beams right on their bar. Shaggy could do nothing but growl as the bastard laughed and drew his arms back for another blast. But a green energy beam from a now completed second-floor window shut him up forever. Other flyers hovered nearby, firing down on the robot horde. Shaggy was sure they were gauging the pros and cons of making a run on the bar. He wasn't sure why they would target it, other than it being one of the largest structures in the neighborhood. He shook off the thought as the charging horde started getting closer. Shaggy and the few other melee fighters in their crew were eagerly waiting for the first of the robots to get through the bar's gunfire. While they waited, Ren and Tinsel were helping to move the robot bodies near the bar. More mats for Vlad to work with. Shaggy grew his claws and waited. He could feel himself getting more and more excited as the horde of robots grew closer. It was all he could do to stop himself from howling. He felt alive, he felt like he could feel the thrum of everything around him. The smell of gun smoke, blood and metal filled the air and almost choked his nostrils. Shaggy glanced around at his new pack and saw that they also were shifting their feet excitedly, each with a feral grin on their faces. Although Tom's grin just looked creepy. Rita smiled back at him as Shaggy felt his excitement spike. That's when he realized he could feel the others. Not their raw emotions, but almost their mental state. They were all excited, and it was feeding into himself and the others. He could also tell vaguely where they were standing around him. Shaggy was pondering the ramifications of such a connection when Sybil howled and all reason left him. The blonde woman's howl barely rose above the sound of bullets and metal clanking. But to Shaggy, it sounded like the clarion call to battle and he had to answer it. As all six of them bolted forward, instinct told them that the north side of the bar would be the safest place to hunt, as the front of the bar had fewer windows. So less chance of crossfire. Shaggy thought he heard someone shouting for him, but he ignored it as he hunched into a loping run and aimed straight at a group of oncoming Bladelings. He knew Rita was on his right and Seacrass was to his left, so he dove at the left leg of an oncoming thin robot. Shaggy's claws sliced right through the knee joint and the robot tilted. He gave it a shove in Rita's direction, who had already swung her sword. Metal met metal as the Bladeling was quickly decapitated. Shaggy felt Seacrass grab the sword of a robot that had thrust at Shaggy's back. He instinctively ducked as the large lizard man left the robot up by its arm and torso, and spun it around. Seacrass threw the bot into the air, and Vic shot the thing as it soared into the air. Nearby Sybil was dual-wielding pistols, and ducking the blade arms of the bots. Tom appeared over her head and batted the swords away with a silver club that had come from the professor's crate. Shaggy threw himself over both of them, claws extended, and smashed into two Bladelings. He felt a third sword graze his chest. But Sybil's pistols tore into the robot before he even finished the swipe. Shaggy felt the wound heal and dove back into the melee. The six of them were a machine. Shaggy could feel where each of his pack members were and how best to help them. It also seemed like whatever bonuses his lackeys were getting made them a lot stronger in general. They weren't quite at player level, but they were a far cry from the standard lackey. Shaggy grinned as he cut through the legs of several charging Bladelings. Sybil and Vic opened fire on the falling robots as Seacrash used a third robot's body to defend Rita. Shaggy didn't know how long they were at it. Time seemed to lose all meaning as he ducked and slashed anything made of metal that came near him. Noise filled his ears as he fought, and he swore he could feel the blood surging through his body as he stopped thinking entirely and just kept cutting and slashing robots. Soon, however, he felt a tug on his pack link. Sybil and Rita were flagging, their stamina was about to give out. It wouldn't hurt them for now, but the pack needed to rest. Without thinking, Shaggy tilted his head back and gave a brief howl. A woo. As one, he felt his pack mates pull themselves from the piles of metal they had created. Something in Shaggy's mind noted that home was a little further south. So he turned his pack that way, and the six of them ran full pelt back to the bar. The sound of gunfire picked back up as they approached, and some primal instinct made Shaggy want to shift into his wolf and defend his pack. But he soon realized that the gunshots were for the robots following him. The six of them came to a full stop right in front of the bar, and whatever haze had been over Shaggy's mind lifted. Aches and pains screamed through his body as Sybil, Tom, and Vic collapsed near the bar's north wall. Shaggy shook his head as Seacrass lent Rita a shoulder nearby. He looked around and saw Ren looking at him worriedly. Shaggy tried to tell his friend he was fine, but his throat was too dry. Ren looked even more worried as some lackeys came out of the bar's front door and helped the other members of his pack inside. Shaggy grunted gratefully before he stumbled after them. Ren put a steadying arm on Shaggy's shoulder as he leaned in. "Yeah, we are going to talk about what the hell that just was." Shaggy made the OK signal with his fingers and staggered his way into the bar. He glanced around as the sound of gunfire still permeated the bar. Apparently, no matter how many they killed, more bots were still outside. Although Shaggy was sure they had slaughtered a lot of the things. Rita and the others were all seated around a table. A jug of water in the center. Shaggy slowly walked over and fell into an open chair. He tried to say something, but his throat felt like it was full of rocks. Vic pushed an empty glass at him and Shaggy nodded in thanks. After a quick sip of water, Shaggy gave a growl-like sigh and looked at his pack. Sybil was half in, half out of her chair. Vic was staring at the bar ceiling listlessly. Rita was checking her pulse on her wrists. Seacrass was sitting up straight, eyes closed and arms crossed, breathing rapidly through his nose. Tom had his head down on the table and Shaggy was sure the man was asleep. Well, Shaggy coughed as he took another sip of water. That was a thing. Sybil gave a grunt that sounded like a laugh as Rita and Vic stared at him. Shaggy gave them a thin-lipped smile and a shrug as he chuckled. Soon Seacrass' deep laugh joined, followed by Sybil, Vic and Rita. Soon all five of them were laughing at the table so hard, the other NPCs started to stare. Shaggy ignored them as his pack laughed off the rest of their adrenaline. "Next time, boss. Let's try not to do whatever the hell that was, okay?" Vic asked as they finished laughing. Rita and Sybil nodded in agreement. "Agreed," Shaggy said as he scratched the back of his head. "Although I think Sybil started it." The thin blonde woman flipped him the bird, but nodded her head. Yeah, pretty sure that was me. I don't know what came over me. It was like I saw an enemy and I wanted to kill it, you know? To hunt it down. That feeling just grew and grew until... She trailed off as the others nodded. Vic let out a laugh a few seconds later as he thrust his jaw at Sybil. You howled. Haha. Not me. Rita grinned as she checked her silver sword for damage. It was good. Seacrest's deep voice rumbled. It felt good. Felt like we were a unit. Like we are connected. The big lizard stumbled over his words a few times as he tried to articulate his thoughts. But Shaggy and the others seemed to get it. Like we were a pack. The others all nodded at Shaggy's statement. He could still feel their connection humming away in the background of his mind. It wasn't as bad as it had been. But he worried what would happen if they stepped back outside. Something must have shown on his face, or the pack link went both ways, because Rita snapped her head up and glared at him. I don't think I'm going back out there, boss. Shaggy nodded in agreement and tiredly lifted his arms. I get it. But we still gotta help with the defense. So maybe help in here for now. Gunshots kept going off and Shaggy worried about their ammo again. He wasn't sure how much the Needle Sister had brought. But he sure hoped it lasted. He also spotted a few of the Needle Sisters standing near open windows, throwing their various powers at the incoming robots. He wondered how long they could go for too. This was a war of attrition and they were the ones with exhaustible resources. Shaggy was beginning to worry about the civilians in their bar when he noticed they were all gone. The bar's dance floor was pretty empty, except for a few injured lackeys resting and recuperating. He looked around, but beside for the lackeys and a few civilians who had picked up guns and were defending the place, it was pretty empty. Then he realized the bar's construction was complete. The whirling mass of rapidly moving builders was gone. Now, the bar was in its full, two-story, bronze metal and wood glory. The open second story had people running up and down its walkways, running ammo and new guns to various windows. Metal pillars held up the second-story rooms, and the wooden staircase now had a bronze banister following it up. Shaggy grinned as he looked around. Enjoy it. Shit cost us a lot of money. Vlad's voice said from nearby. Shaggy turned and saw his pale friend walking over. Leslie grinning at his side. The vampire player was holding an assault rifle and smiling smugly at them. Shaggy grimaced at the probable cost, but he nodded in appreciation at his friend. Figures. But we can steal more. Not like we'll be out of materials anytime soon. Understatement. Sybil grinned. Shaggy nodded and pointed at his pack. Yeah, I'll explain fully after we get through this. But for now, how can they help inside? I don't think they are up for another trip outside. Vlad nodded, but the others at Shaggy's table got startled looks on their faces. Rita was the first to ask. You're not going back out there, are ya, boss? Shaggy grinned and nodded. He put up a hand to forestall any complaints from his new pack. I'll be fine. Without you guys, the frenzy might not take me again. Might not? Vic asked, raising an eyebrow. Shaggy shrugged and made to stand up. The others tried to follow, but Sybil and Vic didn't make it out of their chairs. Rita was using hers to help her stand and Seacrest had fallen to the floor, drawing more stairs. Tom stayed blissfully asleep throughout. Shaggy waved them all off again and turned to Vlad. Get them some guns and some chairs. Vic and Sybil are my best shots. So maybe put them on the second floor. On whichever side is heaviest. Actually, we aren't doing too bad. Most of our problems are coming from the east. South is well defended by the Racks, and the west has got the UGB and freaks doing their thing. The flyers have become a bit of an issue, but a few blasts with our heavy guns and they take off. Or fall out of the sky dead for their trouble. Grinned Leslie. The tall biker lady's hand sparked with electricity as she smiled. Shaggy figured she had fried a few of the dumbest flyers. He took in what Vlad had said and asked about the remaining side. What about north? Did we make that much of a dent? Vlad snorted. Don't get me wrong, the 6 of you tore a hole in the bots, but mostly, the Brute clan seems to have drawn a fair few their way. Obadiah ran off that way to help them out, as we were mainly dealing with the eastern front. Shaggy waved a hand at the empty room. Did he take all the civs with him? Smart. Shaggy said, raising an eyebrow. Beginnings of your new dungeon? Vlad scoffed dramatically. It's a start. Alright, sounds like we are pointing ourselves east and tearing shit up. Shaggy shouted, trying to rouse his still worried-looking pack. Vic got his legs under him as Rita helped Seacrest stand. Sybil was trying to wake Tom up as Vic stated. You be careful, boss. I'll keep you covered as best I can. I know you will, Vic. The rest of you help where you can. Tell Tom when you get him up. Shaggy turned to the front door again as Sybil reached for the table's half-empty water jug. Tom's irate shouting was drowned out as Shaggy waved a hand at Vlad and Leslie and moved toward the front door again. This time he was alone and he could feel it. It was an odd sensation the game seemed to force on him. It felt wrong, but a quick shake of his head and the feeling was gone. They had torn up a bunch of robots, but he was still a beast without them. Although he did briefly wonder, what would they all be like if the pack was larger? Or even if they were all werewolves? The thought made him smile as he walked through the door again, this time without his pack. Shaggy checked his claws as he stood with his arms crossed against the bar's eastern wall. The sound of gunfire echoed in his ears as he watched a few tiny cracks in his wolfish claws heal slowly. He had been all fired up to rush out into the melee again, only to be stopped by Ren and Tinsel. After explaining a bit about the pack link and the frenzy that had overtaken his lackeys, Shaggy explained how he was ready to dive back into it. But his large gray friend put the kibosh on that. Ren said that there was enough gunfire to suppress the oncoming robots for now. He and Tinsel were still moving robots around the giant dirt square in front of the Viper's nest. They were collecting resources as the other melee lackeys got some practice fighting the few Bladelings that made it through their north side. Shaggy had wanted to help, but Ren asked him to watch the east. They were going to run low on ammo at some point, and that's when he was going to have to pick up the slack. Shaggy sighed as he watched another 4 Bladelings fall to the combined fire coming from the eastern windows of the bar. He grimaced as he saw several shots hit the dirt, clearly missing their intended targets. But with so many firing, it hardly made a difference. The robots were weak, but fast, so he got to slice up the occasional breakthrough. Well, him or one of the other lackeys lazing about on the bar wall. Shaggy had even done a circuit of the building, keeping his eyes open for any robots that made it near their building. But they were shot to ribbons before they had a chance to use their weird truncheon-like swords. The flyers were still an issue, but with concentrated fire and the help of the Needle Sisters, even they had learned their lesson. After April had used her telekinetic abilities to rip the wings off a freak that was strafing the second floor with a shotgun, most of the flyers had backed off. Nothing was even coming from the south anymore. Shaggy was sure the Racks had done what his crew had done and holed themselves up in their homes. With the way Scholar's house was warded up, he imagined that at least the Rack captains would make it through the horde. He couldn't get a read on the UGB and freak gangs, though. But from what he saw from on top of the bar's roof, this little in-game event was far from over. Shaggy had jumped up there after his third circle around the building. 2 stories weren't a lot, but it was higher than most of the surrounding buildings. Well, it was now that several dozen of the nearby buildings had been knocked down. It at least gave Shaggy an idea of what was going on beyond their own safe square. The overall picture wasn't too bad, really. The Bladelings had climbed down off the walls of Undertown and spread out in every direction. Like the Omegas, though, they were more interested in destruction than outright killing people. So groups of them would stop at buildings and start hacking away with their swords. Once the building, and sometimes the occupants, were smashed to paste, the Bladelings would move on. Shaggy could pick out large groups of them running everywhere for a few blocks around their bar. It was that lack of any coordinated effort from the bots that was saving them. That and the denizens of Undertown who were fighting back. The streets were filled with people fighting back with whatever they could get their hands on. A few had even ripped the chunky swords off the Bladelings and were using them on their attackers. Groups had formed all over now, and Shaggy was sure more small-time gangs were going to pop up after everything had calmed down. After he had gotten a general lay of the land, he had gone back to his spot on the wall. Now he was watching as more and more robots marched to their doom. Some tried that weird fencing thrust that the Bladelings did to attack people. It made them slightly harder to hit, but it also made them incredibly predictable. They just jumped and thrust an arm forward in a straight line, which made it easier for the shooters to rain down bullets on them. Shaggy was rubbing his claws together again to watch them heal when the steady beat of gunfire died off for a few beats. "Empty," someone from inside shouted. Shaggy stood straighter and waited. The voice was followed by another shout as someone else called for ammo. Shaggy turned to look at a few lackey and saw looks of trepidation, fear, and some excitement. He was sure his own grin was growing by the second. Soon whoever was in charge of the eastern shooters screamed an order. "Restock and reload. Melee fighters defend." Shaggy's grin became a full-on belly laugh as he leapt forward at 3 Bladelings that were trying to clamber over the bodies of their fallen brethren. Shaggy weaved his way around the broken robot bodies in the street and attacked the nearest Bladeling with his claws. They sliced through the bronze metal of the machine's torso, and Shaggy ripped them out again, nearly bisecting the whole robot. But Shaggy was too excited to revel in his kill. He immediately spun to another robot and dodged the telegraphed thrust of the bot's sword. Shaggy brought his claws up to the Bladeling's wrist joint and twisted. There was a slight tug, and he felt the thing's arm fall to the ground. He gave it a hard front kick and then jumped back. His third assailant had tried for their own thrust, but Shaggy narrowly avoided the fat blade. He was about to throw himself at the third machine when a silver spear struck the robot's hip. The Bladeling went down as its legs no longer obeyed its commands. Shaggy gave an annoyed grunt and turned to see who was kill-stealing. Chromia grinned back at him from her spot next to the eastern wall. The metal woman had come out to see what she could do and had taken up a spot near Shaggy. Someone had rushed the few spears the professor had given them outside, and Chromia had been using them to deadly effect. Shaggy pulled the spear out of the robot and used it to finish the thing off before he tossed the heavy metal weapon back at Chromia. Small fights waged on around him, and Shaggy dove back into the melee. Their lackeys still needed training, but if they went 2-to-1 against the bots, they could take them down easily. He clawed through anything that got too close as he noticed some lackeys clearing the field of bodies. A few of their guys need to be helped off the field, but more often than not, if the Bladeling hit a lackey, it would kill them. Those swords they used weren't the greatest, but with the force they used, it could go right through a person. Shaggy dodged one such thrust as he swiped his claws down the thing's blocky torso. There was a twinge in his hands as he felt his claws crack slightly, but the robot fell over dead. Shaggy jumped back again as he looked down at his furry half-man, half-wolf hands. His claws had been wearing under the stress of a protracted fight for a while now. Even with his healing, they had been hurting more and more, it seemed. Shaggy was sure they were due for an evolution, but he hadn't wanted to check his points until this whole mess was over. Something was telling him he would not receive any points for Talani's defeat, and he didn't want to be proven right. With a sigh, he returned to the eastern wall near Chromia as he looked at his fingers. Chromia gave him a curious look as she threw another silver spear, but said nothing. His return was well timed as another shout came from inside. "Clear the line of fire. We're re-engaging." Shaggy rolled his eyes at whoever was giving orders inside and watched as the gunfire kicked up again. Although now it seemed like fewer guns were firing. They were reaching the limits of their ammo supply. Shaggy transformed his hands back to normal as Chromia spoke up next to him. She had to shout over the gunfire. "We're getting low." "Pfft. You think?" Shaggy asked sarcastically. Chromia raised an eyebrow, but nodded her head toward the north of the building so they wouldn't have to shout so loud. Look, we are going to have to do something soon. Even if this all ends, we don't want to be without ammo after this. Every time there's an upheaval in Undertown, new gangs start to form and people are killed by the dozens. No, damn it. Look, once all this calms down enough, one of the big four is going to call a meeting. Happens all the time. They'll talk about what they want to do and how they expect the smaller gangs to act. The gangs rarely listen, but it's a way for them to explain to people that they are still in charge. Okay? And at these meetings, they hand out ammo to everyone? Shaggy nodded his head as he felt his eyebrows shoot up in surprise. Wouldn't a place like that be well defended? Also, won't we be required to attend this little meeting you say is going to happen? Oh, it'll happen, believe me. As for protection, sure it will be heavily guarded. But after this mess, and with the meeting going on, it should be worth a look, at least. Yeah. Sure. I'll tell the others when things calm down. Chromia did something Shaggy hadn't seen her do since he met her. She smiled. It wasn't an unpleasing look on her pretty face, just incongruous with her usual attitude. Something must have shown on his face, because she quickly wiped the smile from her face and went back to her usual stern expression. Shaggy ignored it and asked. So I take it that means you and the sisters are hanging around. Yeah. Rashi and Flora didn't really like it, but they got outvoted. Shaggy snorted a laugh, but then he thought of something. Why don't we just get Flora to teleport herself into that repair guy's ammo shop and grab the stuff for us? That would be easier. Chromia scoffed. Not gonna happen. Why not? Well, for one, Rashi wouldn't allow it. Flora already damn near killed herself when she tried to port through a warded location. For another, I will bet the Rax ammo guy is ready for any teleporters. But not a metal lady and a werewolf? Shaggy asked. It wouldn't surprise me if he was ready for us, too. But we aren't the only ones going, are we? She raised an eyebrow at Shaggy, but he waved her off. Probably not. How many do you think we'll need? Chromia shrugged. As many as we can spare. We? Why, I declare. Is our local one-eyed cantankerous metal lady implying that she is on our team? Chromia grunted angrily. Shut it, Wolf. My new family is here, so I gotta do what I can with the resources I have. Shaggy laughed. Haha. Whatever you say. I'll inform the guys and we can think about putting together your little plan. But if your little meeting doesn't happen, all our plans won't mean shit. Shaggy had just finished his sentence when a hum went through the air. It didn't sound mechanical and seemed to drown out all other noise. Soon, the already dim Undertown seemed to be plunged further into darkness. A darkness that was only lifted when a bright colorful image appeared in the sky again. But unlike Cog's message, this one was fully colored and not just light blue. Also, the speaker couldn't have been more different. A nondescript figure was standing in a black, gold-accented room, staring down at them all. Their head was covered in a heavy-duty riot helmet and their face was covered with what looked like a blank gold mask. When they spoke, it was through a voice modulator that screeched and popped as if it was rarely used. This is the governor. Head of the underground government body. We are calling for a meeting of the Big Four, to be held at the arena. Once you have your territories under control, please meet us there. Order must be brought back to our home. Attendance is not mandatory for the lesser gangs, but is recommended, as we will discuss your very futures. Shaggy shuddered as the unnatural voice echoed throughout the whole of Undertown. It was eerie, but not quite as eerie as the deafening silence that followed the governor's proclamation. Even the robots seemed to have come to a complete stop at the powerful leader's presence. But their message wasn't done. As for the Raku's treachery during this time, we are aware it was only a small group, however, they have broken several accords set down by the Big Four. You will be brought to task for your transgressions. Reparations will be had. That is all. As quick as the silence came, it left again. Sound came roaring back as gunfire kicked back up and clanking metal resounded. Shaggy glanced around to see several lackeys and his fellow players blinking their eyes and covering their ears. It was jarring to go from such a quiet place to the cacophony of noise that now assailed them. Shaggy glanced at Chromia, just to see the short woman covering her own ears, but wearing a savage grin. Shaggy raised his middle finger at her and walked inside. He could hear Ren and Tinsel's loud footsteps behind him. Which was a good thing. They needed to have another meeting as soon as possible. You're serious? You're planning a raid into enemy territory while we are still defending our home base? Vlad asked, clearly indignant. Shaggy heard himself and Chromia sigh at the same time. The two of them glanced at each other but returned their attention to the pale vampire player that was firing one of the K-Tech rifles into the sky. They were on the newly made second floor of their bar, and Vlad was helping watch for flyers and the occasional catbot. Yes. Ammo is going to be an issue after all of this. So we need a plan. Chromia said. Also, we aren't really doing horribly. These things are more of a nuisance than anything else. Hell, Ren and Tinsel are out there moving more bodies than they are wrecking bots. Shaggy glanced around for his other player friends, but only found Slink. The pale youth was firing 2 pistols out a first-floor window. Although the boy finally looked like he was at least aiming. But there was no sign of Dave anywhere. He turned and asked his vampire friend where the excitable mutant player was. Dave had to log out. Something about getting a bite and talking to some friends. Vlad explained as he waited for the high-tech rifles cool down to finish. We are not saying that we should go now. Chromia brought the conversation back around to where it had started. But once things calm down some more, we need to lead a team and go get some more ammo. Vlad sneered at the brown-haired woman. Okay, hold up a damn second. You aren't a boss in this outfit, One Eye. He waved a hand between himself and Shaggy. We decide here. Not you. Well, us and Ren, Slink, probably Dave too, Shaggy muttered as Vlad shot a glare at him. Shaggy shrugged. Hey, it just so happens I agree with her assessment. Plus, these damn robots are more annoying than dangerous now. Shit is calming down and we need to be in a position of power when it does. A lot of groups are forming out there and we need to be able to defend ourselves. Vlad sighed and looked out the window. Shaggy could see fires blazing in the distance as flashes of gunfire lit up the dirt streets. The Bladeling army was everywhere, roaming around in packs, destroying whatever they came across. But they were now joined by roving gangs of pissed-off undertown citizens. Groups carrying whatever weapons they could find, taking it to the invaders that had marched on their home. Shaggy couldn't keep the smile from his face. The people of Undertown were a bunch of crazies, and it was fantastic. Chromia crossed her arms over her chest and looked between them angrily. Vlad ignored her, but Shaggy waved a hand placatingly. He knew the right compromise for this moment. Why don't you go to the meeting and we'll take a few of the crew out and see what we can find out about this ammo guy. So you do want to go now? Vlad asked accusingly. Hey, I would be comfortable going alone, honestly. But with Chrome here, and a couple of lackeys, we'll be fine. These things are nothing. Vlad grunted and took another shot out the window. Shaggy was sure he saw a screeching cat fall out of the sky as Vlad turned back to them. Fine, go ahead and do your thing. You're right about these bots. They are a piece of cake. I imagine they are going to be the new normal enemy type down here for a while. Unless we end up killing them all. The way they wander around everywhere, we are bound to get them all at some point. Vlad just nodded as he turned back to his window and aimed his large black rifle at something in the sky. Shaggy grabbed Chromia's elbow and walked her back toward the stairs. She jerked her arm out of his grip before they descended the stairs, and he chose to ignore her foul mood. He needed to find some helpers. A flash of blue in his vision brought him around to a rolling blue blob that was delivering ammo to the dance floor. Blobby! Shaggy shouted happily. The amorphous alien would come in real handy when carrying stuff. You doing anything important? Blobby extended a head-like appendage out of the top of its ball-like form and shook it from side to side. No, boss. Just running stuff around for people. Good. Grab Ephemera and a few others and meet me outside. OHFUCKNO, a voice shouted before Blobby could take off. Shaggy spun around again until he was face to face with a red-faced Yuki. You are not running off without me again, boss. You're doing that pack thing and I ain't leaving your side till I'm a werewolf. Shaggy grimaced at the loud young man's voice and waved Blobby off to do what he had instructed. He placed a steadying hand on the dark-haired man's shoulder and sighed. Sorry, Yuki. You missed out. There's no more room in the pack for now. Yuki's face looked like it was about to explode as Shaggy finished speaking. Yuki ripped his shoulder out of Shaggy's grip and stalked off, grumbling angrily. Shaggy chuckled as he thought about finding his pack. Seacrest could probably carry a lot and they needed practice with the pack bond, anyway. No more spots, huh? Chromia's voice asked from behind him. Shaggy nodded his head as he looked at her. Yeah, why? You interested in a spot on the shock squad? Chromia snorted. It's shock troop, and you know they are known for taking the heaviest casualties, right? Yeah, but I'm tougher than most. But what about the rest of your pack? They'll fight and win, same as me. We might lose some eventually, but that's the way of the wolf. Shaggy said as he crossed his arms and looked around for his pack mates. I bet that sounded cooler in your head, didn't it? Shut your face. Shaggy spotted Vic back upstairs. The lean sniper was shooting what looked like a bolt-action rifle out an eastern window. Sybil was beside him with an alien assault rifle of some kind. Lord knew where they had grabbed one of them from. He would bet that Tom was probably awake somewhere now, but he couldn't find the annoying man. But Blobby's return caught his attention before he could fully scan the bar. The jelly alien was back in his humanoid shape and leading Ephemera, Rita, and Seacrest. Rita blew a lock of curly red hair out of her face as she smiled. Sup, boss? We heading out again? Seacrest is ready. The large lizard man slapped his pale yellow chest ritualistically and smiled. Ephemera merely grinned at them both before she looked questioningly at Shaggy. Shaggy smiled at them all and thanked the gods of gaming for his good luck. Ephemera was on the cusp of becoming his henchman, and with two of his pack members, it would probably be easier to manage the emotional link they shared. We have a scouting mission. Maybe a little BE at the end of it. Rita arched an eyebrow as Ephemera cackled. Really? We're going to rob somebody with all this going on? Chromia nodded. It's a risk, but this is also the best time to shore up our ammo shortage. The big gangs are going to be heading for the meeting, so all we'll have to deal with is the shop's defenses, and maybe the owner. We know what those defenses are? Ephemera asked, still smiling happily. Last I remember, the shop had a weapons scanner and a few automated turrets for defense. But the shop's owner rarely used them. He didn't enjoy getting them repaired. Chromia explained. He didn't to work on his own stuff? Shaggy asked, confused. No, he didn't build them. The Rags hired a technopath for that, but they were extremely expensive and difficult to work with. Shaggy filed that bit of information away for later and was about to lead everyone out of the bar when Rita asked another question. So we are going into the Rags turf, while they are leaving to be a part of some meeting. While we are there, we're going to rob an ammo store guarded by automated turrets. All during a robot invasion. Is that right? Shaggy nodded and sighed as he looked at Rita. Rita, if you want to stay behind, I get it. But we need ammo. Rita snorted and tapped her sword that was belted to her hip. Shit, boss. You aren't leaving me behind. This sounds fun as hell. Ephemera cackled again as she put her arm over the older woman's shoulders. I knew I was going to like you. Let's get to it, boss man. Shaggy smiled at his assembled team and headed out the door. Gunfire still sounded all around as they stepped out into the square, and Shaggy was surprised to see Ren using his new hammer to swat a row of robots into oblivion. The north side was mostly calm, but it seemed a few more Bladelings were getting through. The large gray alien smiled at Shaggy until he saw his small crew, and then Ren raised an eyebrow. Shaggy told his crew to wait for him as he ran over to explain things to Ren. Nearby Tinsel was ripping a Bladeling in half with his bare hands as a few lackeys hacked and stabbed a few more with their weapons. Shaggy picked up a Bladeling's sword and threw it like a spear at an oncoming droid as he shouted up at his friend. "We got to do an ammo run. The bar is getting low." Ren snorted as he backhanded a leaping robot. "We hardly need it. These things are good practice for the lackeys. In fact, we should get more out here. The waves are getting further and further apart, anyway." Shaggy shrugged. "Take it up with Vlad. Maybe he can send a few more out. But I was thinking more about after all this is over. We are going to need supplies anyway, and with the racks off at their big meeting." Shaggy trailed off as Ren grinned. "You're crazy, Shags. We are halfway through this mess, and you want to go poke the bear again? The same bear you have been poking since we got down here?" Shaggy chuckled, but said nothing. Ren shook his head as he kicked another robot into several others. "Fine. Get out of here. I'll talk to Vlad about that meeting thing. We have to at least send a representative." Shaggy started walking back toward his crew. "Yeah, I figured the vamp could do all that. He is the one that likes all that crap. I am more of a doer than a talker." Ren snorted and waved him off as he moved closer to Tinsel. The two Paranadans started punching and kicked the nearest bots into scrap. Shaggy listened to the sound of crunching metal as he joined the others. The steady beat of bullets firing kept up as they circled the building and headed south. A surprising number of shacks were still standing on their south and west side. Shaggy was surprised, but it showed how well the Raku and the other crime syndicates were fighting off the robots. He picked up speed as Blobby turned into its ball form and started rolling. Chromia shifted into her metal form as well, and they all took off into the darkening streets of Raku territory. Shaggy shifted his feet slightly and watched as the Bladeling's sword whizzed by his chest. With a casual and practiced flick of his wrist, he sliced through the leaping robot's face. It crashed to the street in a bundle of limbs as Shaggy sighed. These things were getting annoyingly easy to dispatch. You just had to wait for them to leap, and then counterattack. Even his lackeys were making quick work of the things as they traveled toward Raku territory. Rita had one in a headlock nearby and was decapitating it with her sword. Seacrass had taken to simply ripping the slim arms off the poor robots after they completed their thrust attack. Chromia could tank the hit and then simply shove her metal arms through the things, while Blobby would engulf them and wait for them to dissolve. Shaggy tried to think of a time he had seen the big blue alien take any damage, but he really couldn't recall anything. Ephemera phased into existence next to him and Shaggy had to stop himself from jamming his claws into the pale woman. By the way she grinned, Ephemera knew she had startled him. "Way's clear ahead, boss. A lot of these things are just wandering around in packs now. Things seem to be calming down." Shaggy nodded as the others finished the pack of Bladelings. This was their fourth pack since leaving the bar. While the groups of Bladelings had been more frequent when they were close to the bar, once they got far enough away, the roaming packs became fewer and fewer. Shaggy had initially thought it was odd, but he figured the racks were intentionally forcing the bots out of their territory, somehow. He wasn't sure how they were doing it, but it explained the lack of bots on Raku turf. Once Rita had finished slicing up another Bladeling, Shaggy nodded and waved everyone forward again. He gestured for Ephemera to take the lead again as they moved. The invisible and intangible woman was the perfect scout. She had informed them of several roving packs of Bladelings and lead them around them. When they couldn't go around, though, they went through. With her in the front and Chromia's directions, they traveled further into Raku turf. The metal shacks became less and less prevalent as more standard brick buildings became the norm. Shaggy wondered why the north was in much worse shape than the other areas of Undertown. Rita and the others explained to him that the north side had been under the Faceless and the Quinnica's protection. The Quinnica had never really gotten involved with the populace, preferring to sell their wares on the main street, and the Faceless were even more secretive. So the north became sort of refuge from the other gangs. A place of relative peace in Undertown. Of course, since the gangs that ran that side of the town didn't put any work into it, the people were forced to build their own homes with what they had. So the metal shacks were what most people came up with. Chromia shouted a curt left. They all turned down an alley as one. Rita and Seacrass kept pace just behind Shaggy, and he could feel them through the pack bond they now shared. The feelings were less intense with just the three of them. But he could still feel the others off in the bar's direction. But they were more muted. While in combat, the bond seemed to hum with power, and Shaggy could feel both Rita's and Seacrass' excitement as they fought. It was an odd feeling, and when he asked the others about it, they both claimed that he was the source of their shared excitement. So his emotions were feeding into them, which fed back to him, creating a loop that amped them all for battle. It was interesting. Shaggy checked their path as he ran. Seeing it was clear, he brought his lackey menu and limited it to just the surrounding lackeys. Now, with the Legion in place, his lackey menu had exploded with over 40 people. Now that they were sharing lackeys, he had a loyalty rating with every member. Which was far too much to look at all at once. He wanted to check on the loyalty ratings of his current members. Ephemera Nalic. Staffantum level 7. Personality chaotic. Loyalty 93 out of 100. Blublin Blobiner Blubberski, Blobby. Mucunoid level 4. Personality ambivalent. Loyalty 83 out of 100. Seacrass Slurses. Baranoid level 4. Personality dim-witted. Loyalty 92 out of 100. Pack bond increase 5%. Rita Crawford. Human level 4. Personality motherly. Loyalty 65 out of 100. Pack bond increase 5%. He was surprised that Rita and Seacrass had jumped 2 levels in such a short time. But with all the fighting they had been doing, it made sense. Also, their loyalty ratings had gone way up as well. Rita was still below 70, which annoyed him, but they could work on it. But Seacrass was almost a henchman already. Meanwhile, Ephemera had become a beast. He wasn't sure how strong a level 7 lackey was overall, especially one not designed for combat. But hey, she was getting stronger. That was all that mattered. Blobby was a mystery unto itself. The amorphous alien's loyalty didn't seem to move that much. It was higher than it had been, which was good, but it was still not growing as fast as Shaggy would have liked. Another thing to work on. Back to the right. Chromia shouted, dragging Shaggy out of his menus. The metal woman not being on his loyalty board was worrying. But perhaps the Needle Sisters weren't a part of his crew. If she was considered a part of them to begin with. Shaggy prepared himself in case this was all some sort of weird betrayal scheme set up by the one-eyed woman. They made the turn and exited from the alley into a larger dirt street. Empty vendor stalls lined the road, merchandise gone from the shelves. Food and clothing littered the street as what the vendors couldn't carry away was strewn about. Chromia came to a stop and seemed to look around. Shaggy grew his claws just in case and watched the surroundings cautiously. He heard Rita draw her sword as his unease seeped into their pack bond. "Why aren't the stalls destroyed?" Chromia asked. Shaggy snapped out of his caution as he glanced around. The metal woman was right. The stalls, while empty, were still intact. In fact, none of the nearby buildings looked so much as touched. Maybe the bots haven't made it this far in. Rita guessed. Not even the big ones that were falling from the sky? Chromia asked dubiously. Yeah, this doesn't make sense, unless the racks were killing the things as soon as they landed. Which isn't unfeasible, given the number of people in their gang. Shaggy added. Chromia nodded, but she still had a pensive look on her face. I don't like it. Even if they capped all the falling bots, the wave of Bladelings should have marched through here. They would need all the members of every captain's crew watching the border of their territory to push all the robots away. Even if they are the biggest in terms of numbers, not all of their guys are that good. Seacrest snorted. Bots are weak. Yeah, maybe. Chromia bit her lip and looked to be deep in thought. Shaggy agreed with her, but they needed to keep moving. Which way are we heading? Chromia snapped out of her thinking and glanced around again. Just about a block to the east. We looking for a squat adobe building painted blue. Kind of far from the center of Rack territory, isn't it? I would think they would want their ammo supplier closer. Rita said. Yeah, it pissed off a lot of crews that they had to wait for some deliveries. But the owner of the shop didn't want to be affiliated with the Racks to begin with. He just set up shop on their turf and then found himself in charge of their ammo production. No one was happy with the overall arrangement. At least that's how I heard it. Chromia explained as they jogged eastward. They made it to the end of the block and Shaggy had them all stop. He searched around for ephemera, wanting the woman to check out the store. The blue adobe building stuck out from the others nearby. Not just in its coloring, but in the accoutrements that the building had as well. Ephemera appeared on a nearby roof and gave Shaggy a questioning look. Shaggy pointed at the blue building and waved Ephemera forward. She gave him a thumbs up and disappeared again. Shaggy stared at the odd building as Ephemera did her thing. It was squat, with a slapdash blue paint job that only covered the walls. The roof was left beige, giving the square building a really odd look. 3 of the building's sides were left bare, save for the crappy blue paint. Then the front is where all the work seemed to go. It was covered in metal sheeting plastered to the adobe walls, and a metal gate was drawn down covering the wooden front door. A large red, closed sign hung on the door. It was even set away from the other houses and store fronts nearby. This neighborhood seemed to consist of a few stores and a couple of houses. But nothing was open, and the people seemed to be gone. Or they were stuck in the adobe brick houses, afraid of the oncoming robots. He was about to order Rita and Seacrest to search the nearby houses when a bright flash of green light came from the supposed ammo shop. Ephemera phased into view as she bounced off a blue wall. She wavered on her feet as she put a hand to her head. It looked to Shaggy like she had run full speed into the wall. The green magic that had stopped her coalesced on the wall until it was a bright ball that shot up into the air. The lights in a nearby house came on and Shaggy could hear shouting coming from inside. Chromia grimaced and looked around. That's the owner. He probably had the shop warded. We need to grab him and get him to take it down. That green orb probably told every rack in the area what we're trying. We need to go. Rita said. Shaggy groaned as the shouting man stepped out of his house. He had to keep from laughing as an old man in pajamas, wielding a weird-looking shotgun, marched his way toward Ephemera. The old man was even wearing a long-pointed nightcap with a fuzzy ball on the end of it and fluffy slippers. He was grumbling something under his breath as he approached the confused woman. Shaggy waved Seacrest and Rita forward to contain the old man as he turned to Chromia. How much time do we have? Chromia just shrugged as Rita and Seacrest ran off toward the old man. Shaggy grunted and watched as Rita drew her sword and Seacrest leaped at the old man's back. There was a loud bang as the Seacrest slammed into the old man's back and his shotgun went off. Shaggy winced as the blast barely missed Ephemera's stunned form and slammed into the blue wall of the old man's shop. Thankfully, it didn't trigger another green flare. Shaggy and Chromia walked over to the old man as Seacrest wrestled the shotgun out of his hands, and Rita placed the tip of her sword to his throat. But the old man was stymied as he tried to squirm his way out of the large lizard's arms, shouting all the while. "Shut the hell up, Silas!" Chromia shouted in the old man's face when she and Shaggy got closer. Shaggy nodded gratefully at Rita and had the older woman check on Ephemera. Seacrest kept the older man in a bear hug as Chromia addressed him. The older man tried to look around, but Seacrest's tight hold kept him from moving too much. "Is that you, Chromia?" I heard that dumb bastard killed you. Yeah, well. The rumors of my demise, etc. We need to get into your shop, Silas. So please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Chromia stepped forward and wrenched the old man's head around. His pointed nightcap fell off, revealing a bald head with a few white strands of hair. Silas stared at Chromia's metal face. You know what I'll do to you if you don't let us in. Shaggy grunted as he looked around. The old man was right. They had minutes before the first rack showed up. Even with their leadership gone, the rank-and-file boys probably knew enough to defend the home front. Chromia looked like she was going to argue further with Silas, but Shaggy nodded at Seacrass and moved forward. The lizard seemed to understand what he wanted as he let go of Silas. Silas spun around and grinned happily until Shaggy gripped the back of Silas' pajamas and lifted him bodily. Hey! Let me go, damn it. Don't you understand? I ain't helping you? Ain't nothing you could do to make me. Shaggy ignored him as he carried the shouting man toward the store. Grab his gun, would you, Seacrass? The old man kicked his legs ineffectually as Shaggy walked by Rita and Ephemera. The pale woman seemed to come out of whatever stupor the green magic had done to her. Rita gave Shaggy a nod as he passed and Chromia followed along worriedly. Don't touch my gun, you overgrown reptile. I paid good money for that, and I ain't letting no worthless alien touch my stuff. Shaggy ignored the squirming man and walked right up to the front door of the shop. He reckoned that whatever magical enchantments were in the store wouldn't activate so long as he held Silas. The squirming older man seemed to pick up on Shaggy's intentions as he wriggled harder. Shaggy heard the man's pajamas rip and sighed. He let go of the man's clothes and gripped Silas by the hair instead. Silas started howling in pain, but Shaggy ignored it and rammed the both of them into the front door. Nothing magical happened and Shaggy didn't feel like he had hit any force field. But the locked front door still stopped them both. Silas gave another shout of pain as his nose hit the wooden door of the shop. Shaggy waited a few seconds to see if anything else activated. When nothing did, he reared the old man back by the head and rammed them both forward as hard as he could. He heard Chromia give a shout, but he was already through the front door. Silas went quiet and limp in his hand as they stormed through the shop's front door. Shaggy crossed the threshold of the store with the limp Silas, and he felt something in the air pop. He was trying to look around the darkened store when a loud whirring spun up just ahead of him. Shaggy's enhanced focus kicked in just as Chromia's voice shouted from outside the store. The turrets, you idiot! Shaggy could make out two twin-barreled turrets sitting just above the front counter whirring to life. He watched as electricity traveled across the body of the turret and toward the barrel. Shaggy dropped Silas to the floor and threw himself forward, hoping that the turrets couldn't face downward. They whirled to life, and he felt his legs get pelted with something hot, and then he lost the feeling in them entirely. A cacophony exploded in his ears as he hit the wooden front counter of the store. The whirring turrets continued to fire out the front door for a few seconds, before they tried to reorient to find him. Shaggy belatedly noticed that the guns weren't aiming at Silas, and he groaned internally. Of course the things would shoot the owner. He drug himself behind the front desk as the turrets tried to aim downward at him. His legs had gone to jelly, and he guessed the turrets were set to or intended to be non-lethal. He heard Silas cackling madly as the whirring of the guns intensified. The firing had stopped, and they were now just whirling around, trying to find him. He collected himself under the register as Rita shouted from the front door. Boss? You all right? Yeah. Damn, things aren't lethal, just set to stun or something. My legs are out of commission, though. Shaggy heard Silas grumble something about cheap gangsters as Chromia's voice spoke up. How powerful are they? Shaggy grunted in annoyance. I don't know. They didn't penetrate skin, but I sure as hell felt them. Do you think I could walk in there? I don't know. Shaggy said truthfully. For all I know, the stuff is magically like the rest of the protections. Why don't you lot stay out there and I'll see if I can find an off switch. Hey! Don't go touching my stuff back there, damn it. Silas shouted. Dude, how are you still conscious? Shaggy shouted as he looked under the counter. Silas cackled again. Heh. You think that's the first time my head's been put through something. But I know the secret. All you gotta do is go limp and think of a pretty woman. Soon enough, the pain stops and you don't even notice the after effects. The old man fell into a fit of laughter as Shaggy shook his head. The old guy was nuts. He eventually found what looked to be an unlabeled switch. He debated whether it could be another alarm, but he figured it couldn't be any worse than what Ephemera had triggered. So he grit his teeth and flipped the switch. The whirring turrets suddenly died and Silas gave his own disappointed whine. Clear! Shaggy shouted. He heard his crew barrel into the shop and Silas grumble angrily as he was taken hostage again. Shaggy laid his back against the back of the counter and looked around. From where he was seated, he could tell that Silas' shop wasn't just for ammo, it was for all sorts of weapons, too. Yes, boss. He heard the thudding of footsteps as everyone moved to obey his commands. Ephemera shot him a wink as she jumped over the counter and ran into the back rooms. He tested his legs and found that feeling was slowly coming back into them, so he tried to stand using the counter to help. As he struggled to his feet, he came face to face with an angry-looking Silas. He and Chromia were standing near the bar watching the others ransack the place. Seacrass had even grabbed a large canvas bag from a shelf and was shoving boxes of ammo in it. Blobby was just jamming all sorts of weapons into its body and letting them swirl around. Rita was by the door with her pistol out. Damn bastards have ruined me, Silas said. Chromia sighed but stayed quiet. But Shaggy only smiled and shrugged. Hey man, that's under town. You own a weapons shop. It was bound to happen, eventually. Silas grunted angrily at him as Chromia shot him a look. Shaggy ignored her and slapped his palms against his numb legs. The old man watched what he was doing and cackled happily. Give it up, son. They'll be numb for hours. Ain't no way around it neither. Shaggy just smiled as his legs were slowly coming back to full function. He did his best to stand taller and eyed Silas. The older man's eyes got wide and then he went back to grumbling angrily at the injustice of everything. Chromia shook her head. Probably not, sigh. This short bastard has accelerated healing. So that probably helps. Silas nodded in understanding, but still didn't look pleased. Shaggy rotated his ankles, trying to get more feelings in his legs. Behind him, he could hear Ephemera rooting around in the back office. Lord knew what she could find back there, but Shaggy was hoping for anything that could hurt the racks even more. They still had the tomb's angle to work and, hopefully, whatever Scholar could do for them. But the more they had, the stronger they would be. Incoming, boss! Rita shouted from the front door. Shaggy expected Silas to laugh again. But the old man just looked around worriedly. Shaggy put a hand on the old man's shoulder and said as seriously as he could. Hey, want us to rough you up some? Make it look like you made a good stand? Shaggy, Chromia admonished. But Silas seemed to think about it before he shook his head. Wouldn't matter. They'd still beat my ass for letting it happen. No sense taking 2 beatings. Shaggy nodded as Chromia glanced sadly at the old coot. He could feel the trouble brewing in the metal woman's sad eyes, and he was about to yell for everyone to wrap it up, when Ephemera came running from the back. The pale woman was laden with canvas bags, and Shaggy raised an eyebrow at the sleek alien-looking pistol she had in her hand. You guys have to come see this. Ephemera panted excitedly. Shaggy shook his head. No time, Effie. We have incoming, we got a bolt. But Ephemera would not be deterred. This will help us get away, now come on. She ran through the door to the back as Shaggy and Chromia shared a look with a confused Silas. Shaggy called for the others as Chromia questioned the old man. You got an escape tunnel or something, Silas? But the old man just shook his head. Shaggy grumbled as he explained everything to the others and pointed through the back door. His crew nodded, and Seacrash shared a bag of ammo with Rita and Shaggy, and they headed toward the back. Shaggy switched the turrets back on as they closed the door to the back. After a short gray hallway, they crowded into the office. Ephemera had really turned the place over. The filing cabinet was laid open, the desk was turned over, and all the drawers were open. Random bits of trash were on the floor. Ephemera stood in the center of the room. The indentations on the carpet showed that she was standing where the desk used to be. Once everyone was in, Ephemera jumped back and reached down to the carpet. She pulled a 2x2-foot square of carpet up from the floor, revealing a small metal hatch in the floor. "I thought you said you didn't have an escape tunnel, Silas?" Shaggy chuckled. "I have never seen this before in my life." Shaggy and Chromia glanced at each other before Shaggy waved a hand at Ephemera. The skinny woman nodded in understanding and disappeared just as the turrets at the front of the store whirred to life. Rita watched the hallway as Chromia turned to Silas. "What do you mean, you've never seen this before? How did it get here?" Silas grabbed his head and looked around, confused. "I don't know. I never had an escape tunnel built into my shop, damn it. This makes no sense." "Well, we are all gonna to experience this new tunnel together," Shaggy said as he crowded the others toward the hatch. Seacrass barricaded the door. "Soon as Efi gives the all clear, we're going down." "All of us?" Chromia asked with a significant look at Silas. "Yep. All of us. Last one through can cover the hatch as best as they can. If we get lucky, they'll think we teleported out or something. Plus, I don't want to leave him here to tell them what we look like. I was planning on accidentally killing him before we left, but this seems better." Chromia gave Shaggy an angry look, which he ignored entirely. Seacrass and Blobby were finished barricading the door as Ephemera's voice echoed from the tunnel. "Clear." Shaggy grinned at everyone and pointed at the tunnel. "Okay, everyone, down the dark and scary hole, to the unknown." Blobby reported they had squeezed a tentacle around the hatch and pulled the rug back over the entrance. Shaggy nodded and headed down the ladder, following the others down into the dark. Blobby released their hold on the wall and fell past Shaggy and the others, bubbling all the way. Shaggy listened for Ephemera's cry of alarm, but it never came. Apparently, his favorite lackey managed to get out of the way. The sound of footsteps thudded above him and Shaggy waved a hand at the others, hoping they would remain silent. Soon, the footsteps stopped, and everyone in the secret tunnel could hear the muffled voices of the rack thugs. Shaggy started slowly moving down, trying to be as quiet as possible. While they could all probably win in a quick fight, having a running battle through rack territory all the way back home was probably a bad idea. Not to mention that, so far, the racks did not know who hit them. Better to let them think it was anyone else. His group slowly descended further into darkness, climbing the metal ladder rung by rung further down. Shaggy was almost surprised at how deep the secret tunnel actually went. But eventually Rita, Seacrass, and the others all came to the large dirt tunnel at the bottom. Ephemera was standing there holding a dim lantern. At Shaggy's questioning glance, she waved a hand down the tunnel. All along the walls of the tunnel at equidistant intervals were more lanterns hung on the dirt wall. Shaggy raised an eyebrow and turned to Silas. The grumpy old man was still in his pajamas and was looking around with a dumbstruck look on his face. Clearly, he did not know this was all down here. Or he was the greatest NPC actor ever. But Shaggy doubted that. NPCs were usually scripted pretty well and had come very close to human levels of interaction, but Shaggy had yet to see one do a complete personality shift. But he guessed anything could happen. Shaggy waved for Ephemera and Blobby to take the lead as he took up the rear. Their biggest threat was still the racks above, and he was the most durable. Seacrass and Rita gave him concerned looks, but he waved them off. Although he found it nice that his new pack was worrying about him. As they walked down the 6-foot-high square tunnel, Shaggy studied the walls. Someone had made and outfitted this tunnel, and they had done it all under Silas' nose. Literally. Shaggy could see that all the nearby dirt walls had all been packed away by some kind of machine. The dirt was packed too tightly and too well to be done by hand. The lanterns were also all stable on their mounts on the walls. He even gave a few a couple of tugs to see how easily they dislodged. While they came loose pretty easily, they didn't upset the overall integrity of the wall. However, beyond the expertise in which the tunnel was built, Shaggy couldn't discern much else. They trudged through the dirt and kept vigilant for any traps or any sign of the tunnel's creator. Shaggy also kept an ear out for the racks behind. But the further and further away they got, the more Shaggy relaxed. He smiled to himself as the others started up whispered conversations. Overall, this had been a successful raid. Sure, they had abducted an old man in the process, but they still came away with several bags of ammo and whatever weapons Blobby could fit into their amorphous body. This makes no damn sense. Silas muttered just loud enough for everyone to hear. The old man was in the center of their traveling line, shuffling forward on his fluffy slipper-wearing feet. He had gone from being dumbstruck to outright indignant that someone had made a secret tunnel into his shop. "You never noticed inventory going missing?" Shaggy asked as he raised his lantern to examine it. "No. I take matic great notes." Silas stumbled over his words, not helping his case. Shaggy heard either Rita or Ephemera snort ahead of him. But he kept his eyes on the lantern as Silas had a whispered argument with whoever doubted his inventory skills. The lantern was odd. It was made of old and pitted metal, but was in otherwise great shape. The light inside was electric and not oil or gas-based. Shaggy found the whole device had a weird bit of discord about it. It was an old-fashioned device, made with old parts, but the tech used to make it was top-notch. Least as far as Shaggy had seen. It reminded him of something the professor would cobble together. "Hey, Chromia. You said the racks had a technopath, right?" Before the metal woman could answer, Silas cackled arrogantly. "Ha ha ha. Ain't no way that chubby little crotch stain could do all this." Shaggy ignored the older man and stared around Seacrest's large frame at the metal woman. She had turned to meet his gaze. "I don't know if he works for the racks completely. As far as I know, they bring him in when they want to have something they want built, done well." Silas spat in the dirt angrily. "Bah. Little bastard does good work. But the way the goons treated him, you would have thought he was a prince brought down from on high to play with us lesser beings." "What does he look like?" Rita asked as she adjusted the strap on the ammo bag she was carrying. "Well, he was a short, chubby kid. 20 years old at the latest, and he carried around a giant thermos of water. The way the boy would sweat, you would swear he had never been outside before. Judging by his size, I wouldn't say that was far off either." "Ha ha ha ha." Silas fell into a fit of cackles again as their group moved on in silence, absorbing what he had said. Soon Ephemera addressed Shaggy. "You think that's who did this, boss?" "I don't know. But he probably did the lights. Look at them, you could get away with just some regular electronic lamps. But these look self-made and overly technological." Shaggy answered, still peering at the lantern. It had several visible seams in the lamp's base and body, showing that whoever put these bits of metal together wasn't overly concerned with form. They were far more concerned about how the things worked, rather than how they looked. Shaggy could even make out some wires in the lantern's enclosure next to the small light. Shaggy sighed and finally put down the lantern. He blinked a few times to adjust his eyes to his dark vision again. Seacrest was thudding through the dirt ahead of him, his large body laden down with several ammo bags. Shaggy tried to send grateful feelings down the pack bond, although he wasn't sure if it would work. The large lizard man's head whipped around and he gave Shaggy a thumbs up and a tooth-filled grin. Shaggy grinned back, but said nothing. They continued through the dark tunnel, sometimes going down, other times going up. But always headed in the same direction. Further west under Undertown. Their little train went on for almost a full hour until Ephemera and Chromia called out from ahead. Apparently, they both noticed something at the same time, which stopped them up short. Shaggy peered around Seacraft's enormous frame again. "What you got?" He saw Ephemera and Chromia glance at each other before Chromia spoke over her shoulder. "We don't know." Shaggy felt his eyebrows go up. "What do you mean, you don't know?" "Boss, it's either a doorway or a sacrificial altar. But in either case, I don't want to get near it." Shaggy pushed his way to the front and looked ahead. The tunnel opened up ahead of them, turning into a large dirt square room. In the center of that room was the device the two ladies had been referring to. It looked like a large metal circle sat on a metal plate. Just to the left of the circle sat a computer terminal, clearly connected to the circle. Shaggy gulped and nodded. The thing most definitely looked like an alien doorway of some kind. Shaggy glanced over his shoulder to see the others all looking at him for instructions. But he grimaced at the thought of sending any of them forward. If the damn thing was booby-trapped, he had the most likely chance of survival. He could send Silas forward, but that just seemed mean-spirited. Shaggy sighed and started forward. He heard Seacraft and Rita move to join him, and even Ephemera took a step forward, but he waved them off. "Y'all move back. If these things blow, there is no sense in it getting all of us." Chromia nodded and started moving back, dragging Silas with her. Rita and Seacraft looked unhappy, but followed his orders. But Ephemera had a petulant look on her face, and she had crossed her arms. Shaggy sighed and waved her away again, but the pale woman just mockingly waved her hand back at him. Shaggy grinned, but ordered again. "Get back, damn it. If this thing is trapped, I have the best hope for survival." Ephemera sniffed, but stayed rooted to the spot. "You know, boss. You pulled this shit at Cogs too. I got your back, damn it. If shit goes south, I'll just go intangible." "Sure, remember how that worked last time?" Shaggy groaned and glanced back at the others, who were further back. "You know you aren't making me look like a good leader, right? Face it, boss. You're a shitty leader. Someone has to make sure you don't get yourself or any of the crew killed." Shaggy rolled his eyes and sighed. He walked toward the computer terminal and ignored the brief cheer of victory Ephemera made. He was about to start pressing buttons when another damn blue window popped into his vision, scaring the crap out of him. He almost closed the damn thing out of spite. But after he read the first few words, Shaggy couldn't keep the grin off his face. "Congratulations. Your lackey, Ephemera Nalic, has become a henchman." Along with a general power boost, a henchman is much more durable than a lackey and can even command a squad of lackeys all on their own. A henchman's loyalty is reset to 50, and you also have the option to make them your number one henchman. A number one is crucial to setting up a criminal organization. Ephemera Nalic level raised to 10. Powers increased. Lackey list unlocked. Make Ephemera your number one? Yes/no? Shaggy grinned. Finally. He had his first henchman, woman. Whatever. But now he had a bigger choice ahead of him. Ephemera was a little chaotic, but she knew when to stay and fight and when to get the hell out. But the system also didn't go in depth into what a number one was or why it was essential. Shaggy mulled over his options as Ephemera joined him at the console. Her overall look hadn't changed at all. The thin, pale, dark-haired woman was still the same as always, smirking at her recent victory and studying the terminal's interface. Since he was prepared for the next pop-up window, it didn't upset him as much. But the damn things were still intrusive as all hell. Shaggy pretended to look over the console with Ephemera as he read the new window. Number 1 henchman set. You have set your number 1 henchman. This henchman now speaks with your authority when you are no longer around or logged in. They will help manage your lackeys as well as your other henchmen. All other henchmen will defer to your number 1 when you are not around. You can give instructions to your number 1 on what they should focus on, but they will also have their own like and dislikes with work. If any henchman rises to captain before your number 1, their number 1 status is lost and will have to be reapplied when they make captain. Shaggy couldn't keep the grin off his face. While the thought of Ephemera taking a few lackeys off on some wild adventure while he was gone was disconcerting, he didn't find it that unappealing. She acted likely she had a screw loose sometimes, but she kept a level head whenever Shaggy was around. Happy with his choice in number 1, he brought his attention back to the blank computer terminal. With a blank screen and keyboard backlit with blue light, it was an overall simple-looking computer. Ephemera had gotten it turned on while he was reading his notification and she was waiting for the screen. But after a few seconds of waiting, they still were staring at a blank screen. Ephemera tapped a few buttons and even smacked the screen for good measure, but nothing happened. Shaggy was about to check for a plug when a nasally voice emanated from the computer screen. Munch crunch, what do I have here? The male voice around a mouthful of something crunchy. A pretty lady and a short hairy man-thing. Interesting. Crunch crunch. Man-thing? Shaggy mouthed to Ephemera, who smirked. Snored, oh. The man-thing can speak. Quite interesting. Well, pretty lady and hairy man, what do you want with my super fantastic transitional displacement device of wonder? Shaggy almost hit the screen, but Ephemera waved him off, still chuckling. Shaggy snorted and let his new number 1 handle talking to the obvious child. Well, we discovered this tunnel in Silas' shop and followed it down here. What is this displacement device? Well, obviously, it displaces things. Mostly for me, if I ever need to send one of my minions to retrieve something from that stupid old man's shop. The idiot hasn't even realized it yet. Hee. I'll show you an idiot. Silas' voice shouted from behind them. Shaggy sighed as the youthful voice cackled through the terminal. Oh, is the old dude there? Hey, dumbass. If you don't want your stuff stolen, maybe do a better inventory. Why, you smug son of a, let me go. I'll sock that little brat like his dad should have. The sounds of a brief struggle came from behind Shaggy. But he ignored it and focused on the blank screen of the terminal. I take it you're the Rax resident technopath. Sniff, I am independent. Although it is true, I have had to make a few deals with them. Shaggy noted the odd tone in the boy's voice, but he pushed forward. Okay then. Mr. Independent. How much to have this thing displace us? We need to get out of here. The technopath on the other end of the call went quiet for a few seconds, before a harsh laugh filled the air. Huh. You're not a part of Donnie's little gang, are you? Oh, that is quite crunch interesting. I'll pay more for no questions asked. Shaggy groaned. Bah. I don't even need to ask questions. You have obviously done something the Rax won't like and now found yourself stuck hiding in one of my tunnels. I hold your life in my hands. Your future is mine to do with what I wish. I could open a portal and send every Rack I can find straight to your location. Shaggy growled as he pinched the bridge of his nose. Deciding he was done with the little pissant, Shaggy shifted his hands into claws and raised them to swipe at the damn terminal. But Ephemera stopped him and shook her head at him. Shaggy raised an eyebrow, but she just grinned. Before she could try to reason with the voice, though, the terminal screen came to life, and they got their first glimpse of the technopath. The camera was at an extremely unflattering angle, staring straight up at the young man's large chin and chubby face. He was a dull pink alien that Shaggy had never seen before, and he had 2 large antennae sticking out from his forehead. One of the young man's hands was on his enormous stomach, inside a deflated bag of chips. The other was operating something off camera. The boy's large eyes peered curiously at Shaggy hands, before he stuffed more chips into his face. Crunch, very interesting indeed. I think we should talk. The screen went blank again and the circle of metal whirred to life. Arcs of electricity covered the surface of the circle, before a pitch-black opening grew within the center of the circle. The edges of the dark portal were rimmed with blue light as the blackness swirled in a circle. Shaggy shared a look with Ephemera, before he turned back to the others. Rita and Seacrass looked ready and willing to join Shaggy. Chromia was holding a struggling Silas as he tried to move to the portal. She looked pensive about everything, but she still gave him a nod. He turned to his number one to see her grinning at him. Her crazed, excited look said a lot. Shaggy nodded at her unspoken words. They really didn't have a choice, so it was better to dive into the deep end and see what happened. "Alright, kid," Shaggy said as he faced the dark portal. "We're coming." Shaggy grit his teeth as his stomach twisted, and a pain appeared behind his eyes. He was regretting stepping through the black portal. Every inch of his body was sore as he felt his feet thump on a tiled floor. He heard the others groan from behind him as he tried to shake away the pain in his head. The trip had been way too unpleasant. Huh. It worked. I have to say, so far, I have only sent my minions through my portals. Tell me, how was it? Shaggy growled as he stopped shaking his head and started looking around for the kid. Shaggy wasn't sure what he was going to do when he found the little bastard. But he knew it would not be a happy time. But as he looked around, Shaggy realized he was in a large square room with nothing but the metal portal at its center. The others seemed to come to themselves as Shaggy spotted a small circular speaker embedded in the wall by the room's one door. Shaggy stomped over to the speaker and huffed at it. He really wanted to go on an angry tirade right now. But, somehow, yelling at a speaker didn't seem like the right move. Gritting his teeth, Shaggy said, "Where are you?" There was the faint sound of a plastic bag opening before the kid answered. "Oh, I'm in my room." "You can't expect me to leave just for the help, can you?" "No, you lot can come to me, I think." Shaggy growled again, and he felt his hands transform almost unbidden. As the pain receded, though, he felt a sudden surge of new anger. Turning, he saw the stony face of Rita and Seacrass, both of whom looked just as angry as him. Shaggy tried to dial back his anger and took a few calming breaths. He let his claws recede, and he did his best to find his calm place again. The pain had been amplified somehow by the pack bond, but it also helped him find his calm. But the annoying little alien wasn't helping things either. "Crunch munch, just follow the little guy, 'kay? See you soon." "Feel better?" Chromia asked, carrying a limp Silas. Shaggy nodded and took stock of everyone. It seemed like they had all made it through. Blobby seemed to have trouble maintaining its humanoid shape, and the others looked pale and angry. But they all were present and accounted for. He was about to suggest they rest for a minute here when the room's wooden door swung open. Shaggy jumped back and stood ready. It was probably the kid's little guy, but better safe than sorry. As the door swung open, Shaggy kept his eyes low to see just how little this guy was. But what stepped through the door still surprised him, not because it was small, but because it was a robot. A weird triangle-headed robot with an oblong body and tracked wheels for legs. The thing rumbled forward, pushing the door open further as it moved right in front of them. It bowed its weird triangle head and then spun on the spot, clearly meaning for them to follow it. Shaggy looked at his crew and got a few curious looks, but in the end they all shrugged or assented to following the robot. Shaggy nodded at Ephemera, who instantly went invisible, and followed the robot out of the room. The kid had already seen her on the terminal screen, but an invisible friend in the room could always be helpful, even if your enemy knew they were there. The armless, oblong robot led them out of the room and into a large foyer. Shaggy got the sense that the kid was extremely rich just from his attitude, but the young technopath's home really cemented that idea. Large, dark wood, gold-accented walls surrounded the foyer. 2 large oak doors were to their right, and a carpeted stairwell leading up to a second floor. Shaggy felt like he was in a castle as he gazed at all the tapestries and paintings hanging everywhere. He heard Chromia suck in a breath as the robot rolled to the staircase and pointed with its triangular head again. Shaggy turned to look at everyone again, but they were all enthralled with the room's sheer opulence. Sighing, he started up the stairs, leaving the robot and his crew behind. Soon they followed along, and Chromia pulled alongside Shaggy. The woman had transformed back into her metal form and even passed Silas over to Seacrass. Shaggy was about to complain about the big lizard carrying too much, but Chromia cut him off, her voice filled with worry. I think I know whose house this is. Shaggy raised an eyebrow. Okay, so who'd dash this way? This way, a heavily modulated voice spoke up from the top of the stairs as another robot appeared. This one looked like a creepy stick man, with a bullhorn for a mouth. It waved its skinny metal arms and stomped its spindly legs as they approached. The bullhorn mouth kept shouting over and over, even as they drew even with the thing. Chromia tried to continue the conversation as they walked, but the robot kept drowning her out. Shaggy put up a hand as both Chromia worried about mutterings, and the robot's constant shouting was giving him another headache. He would find out soon who this kid was, anyway. The robot led them down a series of corridors that finally ended at another large oak door. This one had a few signs on it, promising dire tidings on anyone who entered without permission. Shaggy grimaced as his brain guessed the age of their arrogant host. He really didn't want to deal with a snobby kid, no matter who it was. The robot knocked feebly on the door with its tube-like arms. Shaggy wasn't sure anybody would have heard it, but soon the arrogant voice yelled through the door. "You may enter." Shaggy grit his teeth again and shoved his way through the door. He barely had time to take in the nasty smells and the horrible state the room was in before a loud bang resounded in his ears. He felt a burning in his stomach as Shaggy realized he had been shot. Ignoring the pain, he grew his claws and threw himself to the floor. He rolled behind an enormous pile of trash and clothes and waited for his gut to heal. "Oh, no. Come on, stand up. I want to see if the stories are true." The technopath's familiar voice whined. Shaggy stood and glared hatefully at the chubby alien. The pink alien teenager was seated in a large leather chair, still munching away at some kind of food. He looked barely older than 18. One arm of his chair was smoking, and when Shaggy looked closely, he could see a barrel concealed there. He was watching gleefully as Shaggy's stomach healed. Shaggy took in the rest of the room as he tried to calm himself down again. Little bastard had shot him just to watch him heal. The room was covered in black wallpaper and the large window to the outside was painted over with some kind of dark film. Posters covered the walls and the room stank of old food and sweat. Shaggy could see piles of both food and clothes strewn about everywhere. He couldn't even find a bed and guessed the fat alien boy slept in the chair he was sitting in. Behind the boy was a large bank of monitors on a giant glass desk. Shaggy could even see the computers running through everything below the desk. Whoa! That is so cool. Enhanced regeneration to a degree that I think has rarely been documented. At least for a therianthrope. Some alien species can, of course, have greater levels of regeneration. I mean, supposedly the Ultrarians can heal almost anything, but no one has injured one enough to find out. Shaggy ignored the kid as he stomped forward, claws showing up again. The boy seemed blissfully unaware of the doom approaching him as he went on and on about the various alien species that could heal and regrow limbs. Chromia tried to stop him, but he shook her off as he got closer and closer to the young pink alien. What are you doing?" the boy asked, finally looking up at Shaggy's face. Shaggy gave a feral grin and kept walking closer. The boy seemed to understand his mistake as he operated his chair with a small lever on its side. The chair and the boy jolted backward into the glass desk, but could go no further. "You can't hurt me. Do you know who my brother is? He won't let you get away with it. You need me." Shaggy sighed. "Kid, actions have consequences. Yours and mine. Whenever you do something, you have to be prepared to accept those consequences. Once you know what your actions will bring, making decisions becomes slightly easier. So, I am going to teach you the consequences of shooting me. Knowing full well the consequences it could bring me." Shaggy burst forward as Chromia shouted at him to stop. The boy closed his eyes, and another gun went off as Shaggy sliced his claws forward. The boy gave an ear-piercing scream and Shaggy grunted as he was shot again. But his claws found their mark and ripped straight through the boy's monitors. Stepping around the kid, Shaggy proceeded to cut up all the monitors and the desk. He even destroyed every computer below the desk as well. Once he was done, he turned around, brushed a hand over his shredded shirt, and grinned. Everyone stared at him for a beat before the boy went apoplectic with rage. Chromia breathed an audible sigh of relief as Blobby, Rita, and Seacrass grinned from the doorway. The pink alien was sputtering in his chair as he looked over the destruction Shaggy had wrought. His dull pink skin even looked like it was turning red as he fumbled in his seat for something. Apparently, he found it as he raised a small black square into the air and waved it like a trophy. "Huh. This will show you," the boy said as he backed his chair away from Shaggy. "This panic button is designed to call dash." The boy was cut off as ephemera appeared next to him. Yoink! She ripped the panic button out of the boy's hand and crushed it. The metal casing of the button squealed in protest as ephemera crushed it in her bare hand. Shaggy was impressed as he strolled toward the boy again. That henchman boost really worked some magic on his new number one. "Now," Shaggy said as he placed his hands on the arms of the chair and leaned into the boy's face. "Who the hell are you, and what do you want from us?" The teenage alien glared hatefully at Shaggy and ephemera before he pointedly glared away from them. Clearly no longer interested in talking. Shaggy sighed and contemplated clawing the bastard's arms up, but Chromia spoke up wearily. "He is Donnie Rack's little brother." Shaggy raised an eyebrow and stood up. Rita and ephemera gasped in surprise as Blobby and Seacrass seemed more interested in studying the posters of scantily clad men and women on the walls. The boy turned his face back toward them, an arrogant look plastered on his face. "That's right, might be big, bro runs the racks. He's going to kill everyone last one of you for me? Seems the rumors were true. You two racks don't get along much, do you?" The petulant teenager didn't answer. He just crossed his enormous arms across his gut and grunted angrily. Shaggy tried to put the pieces together. So, Donnie Rack's estranged little brother is the technopath the Racks used to fortify their positions in Undertown. But the two don't get along, and judging by the state of this kid's room, he doesn't get out much. So what the hell could he want from us? Does he want to leave? Does he want us to hurt his brother? Shaggy shifted his hands back to human and put on under his chin as he thought about things. Apparently, ephemera and the others were deep in thought too, as the boy snorted. "Don't stretch your tiny brains about it. I just want to get out of here." Shaggy scratched his chin and stared down at the boy. "So why don't you just leave?" "Pfft. Have you seen me?" the younger Rack asked. "My brother says I am not fit to be seen out in society. So he locked me up in here. He let me out a few times to work on stuff for his stupid underground gang, but mostly I am locked up here." Shaggy nodded, but quickly stopped as he had a thought. "Holy shit. This is Donnie Rack's house." The others all froze, except for Chromia. "That's what I was trying to tell you. His picture and the pictures of his ancestors are all over the walls of this place. We need to get out of here quickly, before he gets back." "Pfft. My brother won't be back for a while. He is too busy defending the city." The boy grumbled sarcastically from his chair. "Defending the city from what? Is Cog still at large? I would have been able to show you, if you hadn't destroyed my rigs, you jumped up, Dogman." Shaggy nodded. "And I would have a complete shirt if you hadn't shot me. We all got problems. How long has your brother been gone, and have we tripped any security by being here?" "Nope. I had my minions shut down everything. Soon as we leave, they'll turn everything back on. Why do you need us? Seems like you could just walk or roll out of here whenever you wanted." Shaggy snorted. "Piece of cake, you turn off the alarm, we bust open the safe and we all get out of here." "Necrotic curses?" Shaggy asked, looking at his blackened shirt and newly healed torso. The boy just grinned. Rita and Seacrass took a step toward Shaggy worriedly, but he waved them off. Shaggy noticed that Silas was creeping around the room, studying a bookcase on the wall. He wondered what the old man was looking at, but he returned his thoughts to the problem. So I tank the curses, and maybe I survive. What about the wards? Golems will probably be no problem. Pfft, sure. The boy said as he moved his chair closer to the bookcase. He herded Silas out of the way and started looking for something. Shaggy got a good look at the book Silas was holding, and he stifled a laugh. The old man in pajamas got an indignant look on his face as he waved the book at Shaggy. Hey! There is nothing wrong with an old man liking manga, damn it. Its culture impact is well documented and the stories are usually pretty good. Battle angels and pretty devils? Chromia asked as she looked at the book in Silas' hand. The white cover of the book had two young women, both an angel and devil, on it. They were both scantily clad and were engaged in what seemed to be an epic battle. Shaggy snorted again as he kept his laughter in check. Rita and Ephemera failed at stifling themselves and burst into laughter. Silas' face went red, but he still looked ready to argue the point. But the little rack finally found what he was looking for. Leave the geriatric alone. Nothing wrong with a man of culture. He moved his chair back to Shaggy. Now here, I may not have much use for magic, but that doesn't mean I can't study it. He tried to place the book of notes he had found on his desk. But realizing it was broken, he moved over to his bed. Then he realized the bed was covered in clothes and looked up and the nearest person. Chromia. Chromia sighed and shifted to her metal form. Using both of her arms, she shoved all the clothes and junk onto the floor. Shaggy grimaced as he was sure he heard something sloshing from the pile as it hit the floor. Chromia shifted back to her human form and shook her arms out, clearly disgusted. Thanks, Toots. The pink alien said, clearly unaware of Chromia's disgust. So some of my minions have gotten a look at the wards my brother paid for down near the vault. As near as I can tell, they are several trap wards, an alarm ward, and a summoning ward. Although what it summons, I can't tell. I don't think it's my brother though, 'cause the coordinates on the ward are for a different plane. I just don't know which one. No shield wards? Ephemera asked hopefully. Shaggy nodded. If she could just walk in and out of the closed vault, then this entire operation would be easy. But the boy shook his head. None near the vault. But the vault door and the room itself are warded against people with phasing abilities and strengthened against tunneling or drilling powers. Once we get to the door, however, I have something that can get it open, which should deactivate the wards. But first we have to get past the alarms and the traps. Chromia said, nodding along. So that means you guys are going to do it? Shaggy sighed and looked at everyone. Rita and Seacrass both nodded happily. Ephemera looked at him like her answer should be obvious, which it was. Chromia looked a little worried, but also excited. Blobby burbled and wagged its tentacles happily, Shaggy thought. While Silas was sitting on the other side of the bed reading his manga. The journey to the vault was done in relative silence. Save for the hum of Rold's chair. Rold Rack had finally introduced himself as he was getting changed. Well, he didn't change himself. He had his robot minions do it for him. Shaggy tried to insist that Rold should stay behind and give oversight from his computer. But with them being destroyed, Rold demanded to be brought along. The group eventually capitulated. So, where is your brother? You never explained fully. Shaggy asked as he looked around the gray brick hallway. Rold snorted and glanced up at Shaggy. I told you. He is off defending the city of Austin with his security team. You know? Protecting the little guy, making sure all the old ladies make it across the streets safely. Shooting cats out of trees. All that shit. Okay, can you give me that again? Without the sarcasm, please? He is out protecting his business holdings, while probably trying to destroy his business rivals. Cog's little revolution hit just as the soups were kicking up a fuss about something. Combine that with a wave of magically enhanced ants and you got a perfect cover for any sort of criminal activity you can think of. Well, if you were willing to brave the streets right now. What's it like out there? Rita asked from just behind Shaggy. The two members of his pack had taken to keeping close after he was shot upstairs. Which Shaggy thought was sweet, but pointless. Roald shrugged. I watched it through my screens. But it looked like it was going well for Cog. He had released a brand new type of robot that combined his own brand of science with a form of magic. Combining magic and science isn't unheard of, but this seems like something different. It was like he gave his creations the ability to use magic. It was quite interesting. So magic robots are wandering around the streets of Austin? Shaggy asked. Kind of. The Supes are out doing their job, so things can get relatively peaceful. But then Cog releases a new variant on his robots, and the whole thing starts over again. Not to mention the occasional giant robot that ports into the city. Chromia spoke up, curious. The robots are teleporting into the city? Roald shrugged. I don't know. I figure that's what has been happening, though. One second there's no robot on the street and the next there is a 15-story robot trying to knock down a building. He. Sounds like the Supes have their hands full. They wouldn't if they hadn't had their own little revolution at the courthouse. Roald told a chuckling Shaggy. Something happened with this new batch of Supes that recently arrived in the city. Apparently they hate the way the HLO and the city do things. Too much oversight, they say. Shaggy glanced back at Ephemera. She met his gaze over Roald's notebook. After a quick nod of confirmation, she went back to reading. Shaggy thought back to the courthouse and the crowd of screaming players. He also remembered the blue alien guy taking it upon himself to crush the HLO communicators of the angry mob. He wondered what happened to that guy and was that the spark that lit this particular fire? Also, the other thing Roald had mentioned was interesting. And the ants? Roald shrugged. Angry gift from a magical ex, apparently. But they didn't know the ants they had magicked up were the type to make multiple hives and have multiple queens. The HLO has been scrambling to get that under control for now. They even allowed private contractors into that one. They never do that. Shaggy shook his head at all the problems the city was going through and briefly wondered if they were missing things below ground. But he shook the thought from his head. Undertown had its own problems dealing with the dregs of Cog's army. Not to mention the massive upheaval that was going to occur once things settled back down again. They had to make sure their positions were secure, and they had to cement their place in Undertown. All while also defending their allies and the citizens who lived nearby. Dead civilians don't pay protection money. So, how long do we think your brother will be out of the house? Rita asked. I don't know. He left a few days ago, and last I saw on the monitors, he was defending his holdings in Cedar Park. He has property out all the way up there? Roald waved her off. Bah. That's just a small housing community he is building up there for publicity. So, of course, he had to be seen defending it. Looks good for the cameras. He is probably going to use it as a place to bury a few bodies. Dad used to do it all the time. Shaggy raised an eyebrow, but anything he was going to say was cut off as they hit another dead end. He heard Roald grunt in annoyance as he spun his chair around. Shaggy was getting annoyed at all these twists and turns as well. I thought you said you sent your bots down here to recon the vault. How do you keep getting lost? Shouldn't you know the way? It makes perfect sense. Chromia said as she waved around Roald's notebook. We're trapped in a confusion ward. Ephemera nodded in agreement. Yeah, which probably doesn't affect the robots. So, for all we know, we've just been going around and around in circles. Bah. Well, that's a simple fix. You fine ladies should have told me sooner. But I realize talking to an exceptional specimen such as myself can seem intimidating. They all stared at the clueless teen as he tapped away at a keypad on the side of his chair. Soon, a trio of robots came running down the hallway. The speed with which they showed up seemed to prove Ephemera and Chromia's point that this was all an illusion. If they had really been going around in circles, then finding them was probably easy for the little automatons. Lead the way to the vault. Rolled ordered his bots imperiously. The 3 bots gave vague approximations of salutes and started walking down the tunnels. Shaggy sighed and followed along. He saw Seacrest adjusted the straps on the bags he was holding and winced. Poor big lizard dude had been carrying those things for a while. But every time Shaggy offered to take a few, Seacrest said he was fine. Rita had spoken a few words to the big lug, but apparently let everything be for now. Shaggy hoped that whatever they could grab in the vault was easier to carry. After a few more quick twists and turns, they came across a large, square room. It was lit up by bright orange lamps, and an old-style metal vault door stood at the other end of the room. But the center of the room was awash with visible magic. Shaggy gaped as he looked at all the floating runes in the air. When he looked down, he could see even more of the things carved into the stone floor of the room. Besides the runes floating through the air of the room, there was also some kind of sparking blue transparent wall that kept appearing and disappearing. Well, shit. Seacrest rumbled in his raspy voice. Yeah, that's a lot. Shaggy agreed. Rold disagreed. Bah. It will be fine. First step is you getting us through the trap wards. So hop to Werewolf. Shaggy glared at the kid before he turned to Chromia and Ephemera. The 2 of them had spread out in the room as close as they could to the runes. Chromia was checking the runes in the air against Rold's notes, while Ephemera was studying the floor. He heard his number 1 TSK as Chromia sighed at the same time. He's right, boss. These first few traps on the floor seem to be necrotic. I can almost feel the negative magic in the things. Same with the ones in the air. Chromia added. So I am going to step forward, and what's going to happen? Chromia and Ephemera shrugged. Nothing good, boss. If I am reading this right, then the ones on the floor are going to try to stop you while the ones in the air are going to hit your body and do necrotic damage. Shaggy sighed. So my body is going to decay while I am stuck in one place. Yeah, but it seems the magic is only a one-time thing, so once it activates, it's done. I can't tell how long the ward on the floor will hold you, but with your healing, you should be fine. Not liking that pause there. Shaggy grimaced. Chromia shrugged as Ephemera looked apologetic. Rold, however, was getting impatient. Just hurry and get my stuff, damn it. You'll be fine if the videos I've seen of your healing are anything to go by. Shaggy grunted. Ephie, if I don't make it. Slit the kid's throat. Ephemera smiled as Rita spoke up from behind him. Don't worry about that, Shags. We'll take care of him. Shaggy smiled as Seacrest gave a grunt of agreement and he heard Rold gulp. He took a few seconds to psych himself up before he grit his teeth and walked forward. He made it 3 steps before a shooting pain in his legs locked them both up. Suddenly, all the little swirling runes in the air dive-bombed for his head and body. Shaggy had just enough time to get his hands up to protect his head before the first few runes hit him. Pain, like Shaggy had never experienced, screamed through his body. He couldn't even get into his menus to turn it down. Shaggy felt his arms slacken and could see his skin turn gray and the hairs on his arm turn white. He grew weak as the runes hit him and then dispersed into nothingness. His head seemed to deform as more and more hit the back of his head. Shaggy thought he heard someone cry out as he felt his legs finally go. He could feel his healing trying to keep up with all the damage. His HP bar was in a constant battle, moving up and down. He let out a final howl of pain as he thudded into the ground, numb to everything. He opened his eyes and stared at an unfamiliar ceiling. Shaggy didn't know how long had passed, but judging by the gray ceiling, he was probably still near the vault. He could feel his body healing itself as he lay on the ground. He didn't know if he was numb to the pain or if it had all actually stopped. A low mumble kept echoing in his ears as he groaned on the ground. Soon the mumble started to make sense, and he realized his ears were healing back into their correct shape. They had apparently curled and gnarled under the necrotic attack. Boss! Ephemera shouted. Shaggy tried to show that he was okay, but all he could manage was a short wiggle of his arms and legs. That seemed to be enough, as Rold's voice spoke up excitedly. There. See. He's alive. Now get that sword out of my face, Grandma. Grandma. Keep a hold of him, Rita. I'm going to check on the boss. Are we clear, Chromia? Ephemera ordered. I think so. The rune on the floor has receded and all the nearby floaters are gone, too. The rest shouldn't bother you. But we won't know for sure until we try. Shaggy tried to sit up and tell Ephemera to stay back, but he was too late as a warm hand grabbed his freezing arm. He could feel how skinny and withered his arms and legs were as Ephemera gripped him. His healing was slowing down, but still trying to do its job. He could feel his tongue reinflate and he gagged as he tried to speak. He wasn't making saliva fast enough. Ephemera shifted his body and a surge of pain flared in his body and he grunted. Ow. Shaggy muttered simply. Huh. Really, boss? You become a damn mummy in front of our eyes, and that's the first thing you say? Well, cough, I wanted to say food, but some crazy woman manhandled me. Oh please. You'd be so lucky. I'm just trying to get you near the door. Effie. Rita's voice shouted. Shaggy tried to open his eyes, but his eyelids felt way too weak. But he could hear something whizzing through the air, followed by a crinkly sound of a bag. Rold's whining pervaded his ears again. Hey! That was my special bag of flaming hot chips. I was saving them for the right time. Hey! Stop. Get out of my snack box. Help! I'm being robbed. Shaggy tried not to laugh as Rita robbed the poor boy of all his snacks and tossed them to Ephemera. The pale woman shifted Shaggy around and he could hear her opening a bag. He finally got enough strength in his eyes and he opened them. In time to see the dark hair woman pushing a chip into his face. He weakly waved her off and grabbed for the chip. Ephemera, my wife would have a field day if I let you feed me. Ephemera snorted and jammed the chip unceremoniously into his mouth. Shut up, boss. I'll apologize to her the next time I see her. But for now, eat your damn food and heal up. Shaggy felt his tongue burn as the chip dust hit his newly revived tongue. His eyes watered as the flavor seeped into his mouth. He had to admit, the snobby kid had good taste. He quickly chewed and swallowed before grunting. I don't look forward to doing that again. It won't be so bad. Chromia answered. You pulled most of the floating runes that were in the room. We didn't expect that. You literally decayed in front of us, almost down to the bone. I am honestly surprised you survived. Shaggy grunted around another chip. Huh. Those who doubt me are doomed to be eternally surprised. Yeah, I am starting to see that. Shaggy squinted as he tried to parse Chromia's strange tone. If he didn't know any better, he would have mistaken it for respect. He was about to make some snarky comment about it, but Ephemera jammed another chip into his face. He shot her an angry look, but she returned his glare with an added look of a schoolteacher. Behave. The look seemed to say. Shaggy grunted but gave a slight nod. He finally got enough strength in him to sit up. So Shaggy pulled himself into a seated position and took the bag of chips from Ephemera. He also noticed several other bags of candy and chips laying on the stone floor around him. Grinning, he ate with gusto. He thought he heard someone whining, but he ignored it and continued eating until he felt like he could stand again. Ephemera and Chromia had moved to study the next set of runes and wards. Rita and Seacrass were standing near Rold's chair. Seacrass had his massive clawed hands on the boy's shoulders as Rita pressed the point of her silver sword into the boy's chest. Rold was pink-faced and looked like he didn't know whether to cry or scream. Shaggy waved them both off and looked at Blobby. The amorphous mass was slouched comfortably against a wall. Blobby was no longer in its humanoid shape, it was just laying in a wide blue mound on the wall. Shaggy raised a questioning eyebrow, but Blobby just extended and waved a tentacle. I'm good, boss, just relieved you're okay. Shaggy nodded, but kept looking at the mass. Blobby truly was completely alien to Shaggy. He couldn't get a read on it. That blobby didn't have a face didn't help matters at all, and Shaggy wondered why the race hadn't taken to making facial facsimiles to more easily blend in. But again, he shook off the thought. He had more necrotic runes to willingly step into. "Gimme back the rest of my snacks now," rolled whined as he moved his chair closer to Shaggy. Shaggy noticed the boy's robots wandering around, picking up the bags of food Shaggy hadn't eaten yet. A sudden and aggravating thought occurred to him and he whirled on the boy. Hands shifting into claws. Rold's face went from terrified at Shaggy's outburst to angry. But before he could yell at Shaggy, Ephemera spoke up. "Wouldn't have worked, boss. According to the book, necrotic spells are only attracted to the living. Robots aren't technically alive. At least as the spells see them. They can walk all around here and not trip anything but the alarm ward." Shaggy huffed. "Well, why does that see them?" Ephemera shrugged. "It works like a trip laser. You break the connection and the alarm goes off. So since the robots have a physical presence, they can trip the wire. So to speak." Shaggy sighed and shifted his claws back to hands. He heard and saw Rold gulp and watched his transforming hands. Shaggy grinned at the kid before he reached down and grabbed another bag of chips from the floor. He opened them up and started chewing as he moved next to Chromia and Ephemera. Chromia was right. There were way less of the floating rune things roaming around in the second half of the room. So at least this next one was going to be easier. "Looks like this is the last set of trap wards, boss." "Well, that's good at least, but we still have to deal with the alarm and the golems." Chromia nodded at a set of runes in front of the large vault door. "Well, those are the alarm runes, but we still haven't seen any summoning runes. Also, we don't know if they summon golems at all." "Fair," Shaggy said. "Well, we ready for this next one?" "Are you?" Ephemera asked. "Just have the food ready." With that said, Shaggy stepped forward and screamed in pain again. "Yeah, that sucked." Shaggy grumbled as he bit into one of Rold's candy bars. "Least it didn't look as bad as last time," Rita said. Shaggy nodded as he chewed through the chocolate bar. The final trap ward and floating necrotic runes had still melted and decayed his skin. But it was a shorter bout of pain than the first time he had to do it. Now Ephemera and Chromia were back to studying the next set of wards embedded in the floor. They had been at it for a short while now though, and Shaggy was afraid they were going to be stymied. Although that wasn't the most annoying part. "Come on. What's taking so long?" Rold whined from his chair chewing on a bag of chips. The young teen had sent his robots up to the house's kitchen to get him more, and he was eating them with gusto. Shaggy even thought the boy seemed kind of smug about it. But apparently the young technopath didn't have a lot of patience. They had barely been waiting 30 minutes, but he had been whining for 15 of them. Chromia sighed audibly, but didn't turn around. "Listen you little brat, we are working off of our combined limited knowledge of magic, your shitty notes on magic dash." "Which are really shitty," Ephemera interrupted. "They're not shitty notes," Rold grumbled around a mouthful of chips. Shaggy ignored Rold and asked. "Anything I can do to help?" "Feeling like a punching bag. That is your fighting style, boss," Ephemera said, and Shaggy saw both Seacrass and Rita both nod. "Hey. I don't have a punching bag fighting style." "No, but you rush in," Seacrass rumbled. "Unafraid of being hurt." "It makes sense. If I had his healing, I wouldn't worry about being hurt either," Chromia added. Shaggy barked a laugh. "I don't want to hear that from the metal woman." Chromia snorted and continued to study the ward on the floor. Shaggy sighed and walked over to the wall. Blobby was still leaning against it. Gun still swirling in its body. Shaggy was pretty sure that the blob alien was sleeping. The way Blobby's body rose and fell cemented that thought. Shaggy put his back to the wall and sat down. He yawned and closed his eyes for a few seconds. But the next thing he knew, Rita was gently shaking him awake. Falling asleep in-game was always a weird experience. It was functionally no different than sleeping in the real world, but it could still disorient you pretty badly. More so when the person waking you up doesn't look like your wife. "Whoa there," Boss Rita said as Shaggy jerked backward. "The girls say they think they have an idea. They want to run it by you." Shaggy grunted and wiped the digital sleep from his eyes. "Yeah, got it. I'll see what's up." "Boss, we have an idea." "A bad idea," Chromia added. Shaggy shrugged his arms. "Okay, bad ideas are still ideas. What do you got?" Ephemera took a big breath before she pointed down at the ward on the floor. Shaggy glanced at the golden color etching scrawled into the floor. The magic writing was contained within a golden circle that pulsed with magical energy. Chromia tapped his shoulder and pointed upward at an identical ward in the ceiling. Shaggy nodded to show that he got it. The two wards were connected. The two of them form an invisible wall that crosses the room right in front of where we are standing. If we cross it, then an alarm will trigger and we will have Donnie Rax coming right for us as fast as he can. Chromia explained. But we were thinking, what if we drop the top ward onto the bottom one? Maybe it'll create some kind of feedback loop and short-circuit the thing entirely. Or it will trigger the alarm and we will have to make a break for it. Shaggy nodded as he glanced at the two wards. Okay, so how do we drop the thing and will we know if the alarm is triggered? Is it silent? Both women shrugged their shoulders and Shaggy turned to Rold, who was napping in his automated chair. Shaggy waved a hand at Seacrass and the big lizard banged an arm against the boy's chair. Snort, "Wah. What do you want? Don't you know it's bad luck to ruin my beauty sleep?" Yeah, kid. Whatever. Now get over here and answer some questions." "Ugh. You all are still studying this? Just run in already, you'll fight the golems, I'll open the safe and we can get out of here." Shaggy shook his head. "While I have always loved the brute force approach, we can't do that this time. Your brother is way too powerful. So we need to be as stealthy as possible. So do you know if this ward is a silent or loud? Also, how fast can you get that vault door open?" Rold snorted. "I can get that door open in 5 seconds flat. Also the ward is, or at least was, silent. Last time I tripped it." Shaggy rubbed a hand down his face. Chromia and Ephemera glared at the teenager. "You've tripped the ward before?" "Well, not me, personally, but I had a minion or two try the wards out. Just to see what they did." "Wait, so if we trip this, then your brother is just going to think it's you trying to get into the vault again?" Chromia asked. Rold nodded, looking slightly confused. "Yeah. He'll probably send one of his goons to check on it though. Better than the big guy himself." Ephemera said, looking like she wanted to make a run at the vault. Shaggy shook his head. "Ease up, Ephie. We still should try your idea. It's just now we know that we won't have to deal with Donnie. Something that would have been nice to know 40 minutes ago." Chromia growled, staring daggers at Rold. The boy gulped nervously, but Shaggy asked another question. "So how do we drop it? Ephemera, can you get up there, or are we asking Blobby to do their blob thing?" Ephemera pointed her chin at the blue alien. They were still laying against the far wall, laid slightly flat. "Definitely Blobby. I can't phase if I am in a wall." "I got it," Boss Rita called, moving toward Blobby. Shaggy wasn't sure how you shook a formless shape awake, but he was more than happy to let Rita try. Meanwhile, he glanced just beyond the alarm wards and toward the final wards and vault door. There were 3 wards, all carved into the floor and all glowing slightly green against the gray stone of the floor. "Do we know what those do?" Ephemera raised Rold's notebook. That's one of the few things he documented a lot of. "They are summoning wards, but we don't know what plane they are attached to. So it could be anything. But the green color could denote a fey realm or something similar." Chromia added. "Okay. So we drop the ward, short out the alarm, trigger the summoning, fight off a bunch of elves and shit, and Junior here rushes the door to open it. Shaggy abbreviated. Rold looked like he wanted to say something about the Junior comment, but Ephemera spoke up. Essentially. But are you going to trust him to go into the vault himself? She shot the teenage shit a hateful glare. Nope. That's why you are avoiding the summoning fight and following him in. Keep him honest. Ephemera gave him a 2-finger salute as Rita walked over with a wobbly blobby. Shaggy glanced over at Seacrass to see the big lizard man setting everyone's bags of ammo and weapons near the entrance to the vault. Shaggy grinned. The pack bond was great at letting his pack know his needs. Seacrass quickly joined them as Ephemera and Chromia explained to Blobby what they wanted done. The blob person seemed to wriggle in thought before he asked a question. Traps in the ceiling? Not that we can tell. Nor anything documented. I also never saw anything get put in. It's just the vault itself that is warded against tunneling. But this antechamber should be clear. Rold said, trying to be a part of the conversation. Blobby wriggled again before they made a beeline for the nearest wall. Shaggy moved out of the thing's way and called out. Be careful. If shit seems hinky, you bail. Blobby extended and waved a tentacle in affirmation. Once they reached the wall, they flattened their body against it and waved themselves left and right. Eventually, they seemed to find what they were looking for and their whole form was sucked into a crack in the wall. Shaggy waited to see if they popped back out. For all they knew, beyond the stone walls was just more concrete. But whatever was behind the walls was porous enough for Blobby to wriggle their way through. After glancing around at everyone, Shaggy grew his claws and waited. So as it drops, we charge at the next set of wards and trigger them. Everyone else nodded. Chromia transformed, Rita drew her sword, Seacrass cracked his knuckles, and Ephemera drew her new alien pistol. Meanwhile Rold was digging into the seat of his chair. Shaggy raised an eyebrow at the boy as he shifted left and right trying to get at something he was sitting on. The others noticed his gaze and turned to look as well. Finally Rold seemed to find what he was looking for and held up a small black box triumphantly. Once he realized everyone was staring at him, his already pink cheeks went even more pink. Was that lost in your ass? Shaggy said as the other all started to laugh. No. Rold cried indignantly. Shaggy nodded, okay. It wasn't. Totally believe you. Shut up. Crash. The laughing grew louder until it was interrupted by a loud crash. Blobby had gotten the ceiling ward loose and both of them crashed down right on top of the bottom ward. There was a moment of stunned silence until Shaggy rushed forward toward the wards. It didn't matter if the alarm was on now, they just had to be quick. But as Shaggy, Chromia, and Rold, of all people, were just stepping on the summoning wards, they found themselves tossed back by some unseen force. Shaggy had to catch himself as he slid back into Rita. He noticed that whatever pulse of magic had hit them had also knocked Ephemera visible again. He looked at the summoning wards, which were now buried under 3 giant trees.